What if the boy who lived never touched the cold doorstep of number 4? What if, on that Halloween night, the first witch to reach the ruins of Godric's Hollow was not McGonagall or Hagrid, but Narcissa Malfoy? Today we deconstruct a timeline where Harry Potter opens his eyes not to Privet Drive, but to the marble ceilings of Malfoy Manor. The scene begins the same way, a cottage blasted open, the air tasting of ash and unspent magic, the echo of a killing curse still humming in the foundations. In canon, a half-giant lifts a crying baby from the wreckage, but reality is rarely so cooperative. Here, elegant heels crunch over broken toys as Narcissa steps through the shattered doorway, wand lit, robes pristine against the chaos, her pale face a study in controlled horror. She is not marked, but she is married to the mark. She has heard the rumors already racing through the pure blood structure. The Dark Lord has fallen, the Potters are dead, and there is a child who survived the impossible. Imagine the psychological fracture as she sees him, tiny, shaking, scar still bleeding in a slow, steady line down his forehead, surrounded by the debris of a life that ended before it began. This is not a political symbol to her in that first moment. This is a boy Draco's age, alone in the dark. The core issue is mechanical. Remove Hagrid, insert Narcissa, and you do not just change the address on Harry's childhood. You rewrite the power dynamic that defines his identity. Instead of a cupboard under the stairs, he grows up in corridors lined with dark artifacts, under the gaze of peacocks and portraits that whisper in Latin. His lullabies are pure blood etiquette and family trees. His playroom a gallery of cursed heirlooms he is told never to touch but always to respect. What does morality look like when your first lessons in loyalty come from a woman who will one day lie to Voldemort's face to protect her son? What happens when family is taught not as warmth but as territory? Narcissa's love is not gentle. It is cold, fiercely possessive, a velvet-gloved claim that says, "From the beginning, you are mine to protect and mine to weaponize if necessary." The subtext is brutal. Harry is not the unwanted burden in the Dursley house. He is the most dangerous asset in the Malfoy estate. So the turning point arrives not at 11, on a train to Hogwarts, but here, in the ruins. Smoke still curls from the rafters as Narcissa lowers herself amid the rubble, silk hem darkening in the soot. She gathers him up, presses him against her immaculate robes, feeling the tremor in his tiny fists. Outside, the night is full of owls and distant shouts. Somewhere, Dumbledore is already drafting a very different plan. She leans close, her voice a whisper meant for no one but this bleeding child and the ghosts of the room. "You will never be left helpless again," she promises, a quiet oath that contradicts every intention of leaving Harry hidden among Muggles. In that single private vow, canon fractures, and Malfoy Manor becomes the cradle of the Chosen One. But how does that oath become reality? How do we deconstruct a timeline built on a baby on a doorstep and replace it with a child carried into a house of serpents? The altered chain of events begins hours earlier in the smoking ruins of Godric's Hollow. Voldemort has already vanished. The dark mark still hangs above the cottage, a sickly, fading brand on the night. Lucius Malfoy receives the first frantic summons from what remains of the Death Eater network. The Dark Lord is gone, the Potters are dead, the prophecy is in question. Lucius is calculating, terrified for his own position. He does what he always does when power wobbles. He sends his wife. Narcissa apparates to the village under strict instructions. Verify the deaths, secure any artifacts, report back. The core issue is mechanical. Someone must confirm whether the boy who lived exists at all, whether there is any leverage to be claimed before the Ministry arrives. She walks through the broken gate, her shoes crunching glass and charred wood, remembering another Halloween at Hogwarts, where Lily Evans laughed in the Great Hall and hexed a Slytherin boy for calling her a mudblood. Inside, the reality is worse than any rumour. James's body in the hallway, Lily in the nursery, the air still crackling with spent magic and trauma. Narcissa was never branded with the dark mark, but she is not naive. She has seen death before. What she has not seen is this: a green-eyed infant screaming in a crib splintered by a killing curse that failed. Imagine the psychological fracture as she recognizes Lily's eyes in the child of the woman her world dismissed as blood traitor, and realizes that this baby has already survived what grown wizards could not. She moves almost involuntarily, a conjured blanket, a quick warming charm, her arms closing around him with the efficient grace of a mother who has already raised one boy through fevers and nightmares. She steps to the shattered window, feels the cold night air cut across his damp face, and turns her body to shield him. In that simple physical gesture, the turning point arrives. She is no longer an observer of the Dark Lord's work. She is a barrier against it. By Lucius's logic, she should summon the others immediately, leverage the child, reinsert the Malfoy name into whatever power structure rises from these ashes. But she does not touch her wand. She does not call. Instead, she apparates away with the child pressed tight against her, not to Voldemort's followers, not to Dumbledore, but directly to Malfoy Manor, a neutral ground only in the sense that its loyalties are to itself. Off-screen, a second war begins, this one waged in letters and closed rooms. Dumbledore's owls arrive, some intercepted by Lucius, some answered by Narcissa with careful, icy politeness. We can infer at least one tense private meeting. The old headmaster in her drawing room, portraits pretending to sleep, Lucius conveniently absent. Harry stays with her, she insists, under pure blood protection, under a name the Ministry will not dare to challenge. In exchange, there is a fragile secret agreement. Dumbledore will watch from a distance. The Malfoys will keep the boy alive and unmarked. The subtext is brutal. Instead of being abandoned to a Muggle doorstep as a living weapon in hiding, Harry is carried over the threshold of Malfoy Manor, his weight settled on Narcissa's hip like a claim. She has already decided he will never be used as anyone's weapon but her own, even if that means redefining what protection and loyalty will cost him. The next fracture will not be about survival. It will be about identity. And when Draco Malfoy wakes the next morning to find a strange baby in his home, the dynamic of the entire war quietly tilts. Draco's confusion is loud. Narcissa's rebellion is quiet. In that nursery, with its silver-trimmed cradle and charmed starlight, she is already doing something far more radical than hexing a Ministry official. She is rewriting the Malfoy definition of family. To understand this, we deconstruct a timeline that canon only hints at. In Deathly Hallows, Narcissa walks through corpses in the Forbidden Forest, bends over Harry, and lies directly to Voldemort's face. She does it for one reason: Draco. That single question, "Is Draco alive?" reveals a hierarchy of loyalty that does not include the Dark Lord at the top. Here, that instinct activates years earlier. The woman who will one day trade the Dark Lord's victory for her son's heartbeat is the same woman who now trades ideological purity for a stranger's survival. Her psychology is not sentimental. Narcissa Black was raised in a house where blood purity functioned as religion and social currency, where family trees were literally burned for disobedience. She marries into Malfoy wealth, moves into a manor lined with dark artifacts, and yet, crucially, never takes the dark mark. Imagine the psychological fracture required to inhabit that world and still refuse the final brand of obedience. She believes in power, in lineage, in structure, but not in kneeling blindly. So when she looks at Harry, she does not see a Gryffindor legend. She sees political capital. The boy who lived, raised as a Malfoy ally, could anchor their position no matter which way the war tilts. The core issue is mechanical. In a society obsessed with blood and prophecy, controlling the symbol means controlling the narrative. This is the speech she gives herself, the rationalization that sounds appropriately cold in the mirror. But the subtext is brutal. Underneath the calculation is a quieter, more dangerous truth. She cannot leave a baby on Albus Dumbledore's chessboard or under the Ministry's microscope. She has watched both institutions sacrifice children to preserve their own myths. Voldemort uses trauma as leverage. Dumbledore uses it as curriculum. Narcissa is done offering up sons to anyone's lesson plan. This creates the central tension of the entire dynamic. Narcissa becomes both savior and jailer. She will give Harry safety, yes, and the best tutors money can buy, and an education in etiquette and one work that most pure-blood heirs would envy. He will learn which fork to use at a Wizengamot luncheon before he learns what a playground is. He will be held, genuinely, when nightmares come. But every comfort is wrapped in Malfoy ideology, every bedtime story threaded with warnings about people like Dumbledore and the dangerous sentimentality of the Potters. Over time, Harry's identity will be built inside that gilded cage. His loyalty will be measured in how well he plays the role she has scripted. Weapon, shield, heir, bargaining chip. And yet, even Narcissa cannot fully predict which piece of that role he will reject first. One night she stands over his crib, the manor quiet, the dark mark absent from her arm yet present in every shadowed corner. She smooths the lightning bolt scar with a fingertip and whispers, almost to herself, "You will never be theirs." She does not clarify whether she means Dumbledore, Voldemort, or the ghosts of James and Lily Potter. And as the wards hum faintly around Malfoy Manor, the reality is simple. Harry will eventually have to choose. Just not yet. The turning point arrives not with a dark mark, but with a nursery door. Lucius Malfoy steps into the dim, warded room, already furious that Narcissa has sealed off an entire wing. His anger stalls when he sees the crib. It dies altogether when he sees the scar. There is a moment of absolute surgical silence as his brain assembles the only conclusion reality permits. His wife has brought the boy who lived into Malfoy Manor. Imagine the psychological fracture in that instant. Lucius, who has built his identity on control, bloodline, and proximity to power, is suddenly staring at the one infant in the world who can collapse his entire structure of safety. The subtext is brutal. This is not a child. This is a political event wrapped in a blanket. He moves closer, every line of his body rigid, and you can almost hear the calculus. If the Ministry discovers Harry here, Lucius becomes the man who hid a national symbol from the public and from Dumbledore. If Voldemort returns and learns the truth, Lucius becomes the man who sheltered the living proof of his failure. And hovering above both is Dumbledore himself, whose gaze has a way of making even pure-blood patriarchs feel like misbehaving schoolboys. There is no version of this discovery that is safe. Narcissa understands all of that before he speaks. She has had hours alone with the baby and with her fear. When she finally answers his hissed, "What have you done?" she does not talk about mercy or Lily or pity. She talks about leverage, about timing, about what happens to families who choose the wrong side of history twice. The core issue is mechanical. A boy raised as a Potter will belong to Dumbledore. A boy raised as a Malfoy can be aligned, shaped, taught the etiquette of pure blood society, the language of influence, the quiet magic of obligation and debt. Narcissa frames Harry not as a hostage but as a future bridge, to a restored ministry if Dumbledore wins, or to a chastened Dark Lord who suddenly finds the boy who lived calling a Malfoy mother. Lucius hears the argument. He also hears the unspoken refusal when he suggests St. Mungo's, an orphanage, even a quiet accident. Narcissa does not raise her voice. She simply states that the manor's wards recognize the child now, that removing him would be destabilizing. The irony is dry and vicious. The safest place for the wizarding world's most endangered infant may genuinely be the house of a Death Eater. So a pact forms, not in ink, but in eye contact over a sleeping baby. Lucius will keep the secret, will fund tutors and warders and a carefully curated identity on the condition that Harry James Potter remains politically useful. Narcissa, in turn, swears that the boy will understand loyalty before he understands prophecy. Harry will be a symbol first, a person second. We deconstruct a timeline at a dinner table. Picture the long, gleaming expanse of Malfoy silver and glass, candles reflected in polished wood. At one end, Lucius sits, already envisioning future negotiations. How a grown Harry might stand in the Wizengamot, how that scar might sway juries and ministers. At the other, Narcissa watches the baby in a conjured high chair, seeing none of that. She sees a son who will need protection from the very bargains being written around him. Between them, Harry gurgles, fingers closing on a silver spoon that is far too heavy for his hand. The scar catches the candlelight, a thin bolt of reflected fire. For a moment, the camera lingers there as if the lightning itself is listening, already recording the promises made in this room. The war has not restarted. Voldemort is still a whisper. Dumbledore still distant. But the dynamic is set. In this house, Harry Potter will always be both weapon and child. The question is simple and devastating. Which identity will win when the Dark Lord finally knocks on Malfoy Manor's door? The war is distant, but its rehearsal begins in the nursery. Draco Malfoy is 3 years old when his world fractures. One morning, his mother's arms belong to him alone. By evening, they cradle a black-haired intruder with a bandaged forehead and a name Draco cannot yet pronounce. Imagine the psychological fracture in a child who has been raised as the center of a perfectly ordered pureblood universe, suddenly displaced by a baby who will not even look at him on command. He stands at the edge of Narcissa's chaise, small fingers digging into expensive upholstery, watching as she rocks Harry. Lucius hovers nearby, uncharacteristically uncertain, speaking in low tones about wards, about oaths, about what Dumbledore must never know. Draco hears none of the words. He hears only the silence where his own praise should be. The subtext is brutal. The boy who lived has moved into his nursery, and Draco has no language yet for jealousy. Narcissa supplies one. Deliberately, almost ceremonially, she refuses to let Harry be an orphaned guest. In private, she calls him Hadrian Black, a Malfoy-adjacent fiction that stitches him into her family's structure without openly defying the Dark Lord or the Ministry. She corrects Draco's first attempts at distance. Not Potter, not that baby. Your brother, Draco. At worst, your cousin. He is ours. The core issue is mechanical. If Harry is linguistically family, then betraying him later will require an act of conscious treason, not casual compliance. Draco's emotions knot around that command. There is pride, sharp and precocious, at having the boy who lived sleeping in the next cot. Even at 4, he understands power as proximity, and there is no closer proximity than sharing a toy broom. There is resentment, colder and quieter, when Narcissa kisses Harry's scar with the same tenderness she once reserved for his scraped knees. And there is fascination, a morbid, almost scientific curiosity, as he watches Harry's fingers trace the lightning mark in the mirror, as if checking that his own identity is still attached to his skin. Under Lucius's gaze, a new dynamic forms. Draco becomes tutor and translator, the tiny aristocrat explaining pureblood customs to a boy who will never remember the Muggle world. He teaches Harry which forks house elves must never touch, which names are spoken with reverence, which with contempt. He parrots slurs he barely understands, offering them to Harry as if they were simply another kind of vocabulary word. Yet when Lucius's voice sharpens at a misstep, Draco is also the only one who can meet Harry's eyes and communicate without words the shared terror of disappointing a Malfoy patriarch. The turning point arrives in a whisper of robes and masked faces. One winter evening, the manor fills with Death Eaters. Draco has been told to stay upstairs. Harry has been told nothing at all. They end up together under the long dining table, 2 small bodies pressed into the shadowed gap between carved legs and cold marble. Above them, boots pass, cloaks swish, and the dark mark on sleeves glows faintly in the firelight. Harry reaches for Draco's hand first. Draco does not pull away. In that cramped, dust-smelling darkness, they listen to the low murmur of plans they cannot yet decode. Raids, punishments, the casual logistics of future trauma. We deconstruct a timeline here where the first alliance between Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy is not forged in a Hogwarts corridor, but in shared, silent fear. When Narcissa finally lifts the tablecloth and finds them, they are still clutching each other, knuckles white. She says nothing about cowardice. She only gathers them both, one on each hip, as masked figures glide by in the hall. On that night, the reality is simple. Before they are rivals, they are survivors in training. The question moving toward Hogwarts is whether that hand clasp becomes a weapon, or a memory both will spend years trying to deny. Morning at Malfoy Manor is not gentle, it is orchestrated. Harry wakes not to an alarm, but to the soft crack of a house elf apparating at the foot of his 4-poster bed, curtains embroidered with the Malfoy crest, and, newly added, a discreet Potter sigil Narcissa insisted upon. Robes are laid out, shoes polished, schedule recited in a whisper. Reading with Madame Selwyn. History of magic with Professor Burbage's more respectable cousin. Etiquette with a retired Gringotts liaison who treats the dinner fork like a weapon of state. The core issue is mechanical. His entire day is designed as a machine that manufactures a pure-blood heir. Latin incantations before breakfast, wandless, chanted like prayers, copying genealogies until his hand cramps, practicing the angle of a bow to Lord versus merely Sir. The elves enforce this structure with terrifying gentleness. They appear when he lingers, vanish when he complies, an invisible nervous system regulating the manor's body. In the original timeline, Harry's childhood is defined by deprivation. A cupboard, broken toys, the constant message that he is less. But here the message is excess with conditions. His bedroom is enormous, its windows tall enough to frame the Wiltshire sky like a painting. Shelves hold children's books bound in leather, Quidditch miniatures that fly in slow, dignified circles, and, above the fireplace, a moving tapestry that quietly rearranges itself to highlight the most illustrious branches of his combined heritage. It looks like privilege. It is actually programming. Every object is curated to remind him that names are power, and he carries two. He learns which portraits he must greet, and which he may ignore. He is corrected once for lingering too long on a faded black aunt who married a Muggle-born. The portrait itself is blank, but the absence is a lesson. Imagine the psychological fracture of growing up in a room that tells you are precious while silently erasing anyone who broke the rules that made you so. At the dinner table, Harry practices the Malfoy mask. Back straight, napkin precise, voice modulated. Lucius speaks of ministry affairs. Narcissa watches Harry more than she watches her husband. He learns to praise respectable families, to let his lip curl almost imperceptibly at the name Weasley, to address house elves without warmth, but without open cruelty. Draco copies Lucius, Harry copies Narcissa, building an identity from observation and survival. The turning point arrives on an afternoon that should have been unremarkable. A tutor offhandedly mentions mudbloods while explaining why certain seats at the Wizengamot will never be filled by upstarts. Harry repeats the word later, tasting it like a new spell. Narcissa's reaction is instant. A tightening around the eyes, a hand on his shoulder guiding him away from listening portraits. She does not say, "We hate them." She says, "We protect what is ours." Tradition is fragile, Harry. Careless blood weakens old magic. In that moment, she reframes ideology as guardianship. The subtext is brutal, prejudice recast as duty. For a child who owes his entire rescued existence to her loyalty, the distinction is convincing. Yet, the fracture line remains. One night, he watches an elf slam its ears in the oven door for spilling pumpkin juice near his boots. No one ordered it. The punishment is automatic, baked into the hierarchy he has been taught to accept. Harry reaches out, then stops. Malfoy lessons warring with something older and nameless. He cannot articulate why, but the sight feels wrong in a way no etiquette text has prepared him for. As the manor settles into silence, he lies awake, hearing phantom echoes of that oven door. Raised by Malfoys, trained to protect tradition, he is already failing at one unspoken rule. He has begun, dangerously, to question the reality they built around him. The name comes for him in fragments. Not as a bedtime story, not as a proud genealogy recited over tea, but as a weaponized noun drifting down a marble corridor. Harry is passing the study, arms full of etiquette primers, when he hears Lucius say it with that particular surgical disdain. The Potter boy complicates everything. He stops. There is, as far as he knows, only one boy in this manor. On the other side of the door, the conversation continues, clinical and political. A guest from the ministry, voice oily with caution, asks whether the Potter heir might yet be turned to the right cause. Lucius's reply is colder. The boy is a symbol, a legal knot around certain vaults, a reminder of a failed knight and a master who fell. His survival is not a miracle, it is an administrative inconvenience. Imagine the psychological fracture in that hallway. Harry has grown up answering to Harry, to dear, to my son, when Narcissa is feeling brave. Potter has been a line in a family tree, a word smoothed over, never dwelt on. Hearing it deployed as a problem, not a person, forces a new, jagged structure into his identity. Narcissa moves quickly once she realizes he is heard. She does not deny the name, she curates it. In the blue-lit quiet of the drawing room, she sketches Lily and James as good people, but naive. Idealists who trusted the wrong leaders and the wrong protections. Dumbledore, in her telling, is a manipulative architect of chaos, a man who needed martyrs more than he needed solutions. Voldemort becomes a tragic, necessary force who went too far, a brutal answer to a question the Ministry refused to ask. The core issue is mechanical. She is not trying to erase Harry's past. She is trying to domesticate it, to fold the Potter legacy into a Malfoy narrative of order, control, and survival. If the boy who lived believes his parents were gentle but misguided, then loyalty to Narcissa can coexist with a muted, painless grief. Lucius offers no such anesthesia. When he speaks of the Potters, rarely and never to Harry's face, they are blood traitors, their friendship with Muggles an exploitable weakness that helped doom them. Overheard from stairwells and half-open doors, Harry learns that his parents' deaths are, in certain circles, a cautionary tale about ideological softness. His survival is framed as a statistical fluke that complicated Dark Lord logistics. And yet there is the wand. Narcissa has kept Lily's wand locked away, officially as evidence, unofficially as something she cannot quite discard. The first time Harry holds it, under the pretext of understanding where you came from, the magic hums differently. His own wand is precise, disciplined, a razor. This one is warm. It fits his hand with an intimacy that feels like memory. There is a faint, impossible comfort in the way it responds to him, a softness at odds with the cold contempt laced through every mention of his mother's name. The subtext is brutal. The only trace of Lily he is allowed to touch is the instrument that failed to save her. This dissonance becomes a quiet, internal war. Is he the polished Malfoy protégé, trained in pure-blood dynamics and political power, or the echo of these reckless, loving strangers who died for a future he has been taught to distrust? We deconstruct a timeline where the boy can feel both answers vibrating in his grip every time he switches wands. The turning point arrives one evening when he is searching Narcissa's desk for a quill and finds, wedged behind a false panel, a photograph. Not a ministry file, not a propaganda clipping. A moving image of a young couple and a baby with his exact eyes, laughing at something just out of frame. He recognizes the man's hair, the woman's smile, the way the baby reaches forward like he already knows the world will answer. He has never met them. He knows them instantly. The signature on the back is Dumbledore's. Harry stares at the photo, at the proof that someone once tried to send him a different story, and that Narcissa Malfoy, who saves dark artifacts without blinking, could not bring herself to destroy this one. When the manor clock tolls the hour and footsteps sound in the corridor, he is still holding it, caught between two legacies, wondering which one he has just betrayed by looking. Dumbledore, of course, hears about the photograph. Not the content, that Harry has seen James and Lily smiling from a safer past, but the fact of it. A ripple in the carefully controlled narrative he intended to build from Privet Drive. In the original timeline, the structure is simple: blood protection, emotional deprivation, and then gradual guided contact. Here we deconstruct a timeline where that entire architecture collapses before it is even raised. At Godric's Hollow, the divergence is brutal. Dumbledore arrives not to a crying infant and a ruined house, but to a cooling battlefield already cleared. Narcissa has moved faster. She has taken the child, invoked ancient pure-blood hospitality, and, crucially, done it in front of enough witnesses that the Wizengamot cannot simply pretend it never happened. The core issue is mechanical. Dumbledore cannot, without triggering open war, wrench the boy who lived out of Malfoy hands. So he pivots to law, not lightning. Behind closed doors, imagine the psychological fracture in that meeting. Dumbledore, the old idealist with half the ministry in his pocket, facing Narcissa and Lucius, who now possess both the child and the public narrative of rescue. He proposes Privet Drive and Blood Wards. Lucius counters with lineage, influence, and security. Narcissa, standing between them, offers the only compromise anyone in that room can live with: a magically binding accord. Harry James Potter will attend Hogwarts at 11. No tutors-only education, no convenient illness keeping him at the manor. At 11 he crosses Dumbledore's threshold. Until then, the Malfoys control his daily reality. After that, Hogwarts becomes contested territory. It is not what Dumbledore wanted. It is nonetheless power. His moral calculus becomes excruciating. Is it better to leave Harry in enemy hands and trust that Lily's sacrificial magic has marked him deeper than any Malfoy lesson plan? Or to challenge one of the most entrenched pure-blood dynasties in Britain, potentially driving the remnants of Voldemort's followers into a defensive frenzy around the boy they currently display like a trophy? The subtext is brutal. Every option risks Harry's identity, his safety, or both. In the Privet Drive timeline, Dumbledore is grooming a weapon. Here, the turning point arrives much earlier. He cannot shape Harry's childhood, so he begins planning to shape Harry's adolescence instead, not by sharpening him, but by destabilizing him. Hogwarts, in this version, is designed as a pressure cooker. Gryffindor courage, Slytherin cunning, Hufflepuff loyalty, Ravenclaw perspective, all competing for a boy who arrives fluent in pure-blood etiquette and Malfoy ideology. Dumbledore quietly adjusts the faculty dynamic too. Snape is warned, McGonagall is briefed, and even the Hat may receive a nudge. The goal is no longer to produce a compliant hero, but to introduce fractures into a carefully curated Malfoy narrative to seed doubt, empathy, and alternative loyalties in the Chosen One raised among dark artifacts. And then, pattern interrupt. Cut to the Manor Gardens, flooded with late afternoon light. Two small figures streak above the manicured hedges on toy brooms they were absolutely not given permission to take. Draco is shouting gleeful insults. Harry is laughing so hard he nearly falls. For a moment there is no prophecy, no headmaster, no binding contract, just two children carving loops through the air, oblivious to the war being planned around them. The summer air over the manor grounds smells of cut grass and polish, of a life so controlled that even the breeze seems to obey. The boys' brooms are confiscated before dinner. There is a lecture about rules. And then, quietly, inevitably, the household pivots into waiting. Because everyone in this house knows what comes after toy brooms and growth spurts. What if the morning the Hogwarts owls arrive is not chaos, but choreography? What if the boy who lived meets his destiny not at a cupboard door, but at a monogrammed breakfast setting under a chandelier older than his entire bloodline? Today we deconstruct a timeline where the call to Hogwarts lands in a family that has been rehearsing for it since Harry could hold a toy wand. The day itself is almost insultingly calm. Narcissa ensures the table is perfect, silver gleaming, tea precisely brewed, Prophet folded to show neither Darkmark nor Dumbledore on the front page. Draco vibrates with barely contained anticipation. Harry, taller now, hides his own behind an affected Malfoy languor he has practiced in the mirror. Lucius reads or pretends to. The reality is that every adult in the room is listening for wings. The owls arrive not as an invasion but as procession. 3 of them, in fact, 2 bearing thick parchment envelopes, one carrying a discreet note from Gringotts regarding school funds. A house elf opens the window at exactly the right moment. No letters are chased around the room. No one screams. The owls land neatly along the table runner like they have done this every generation, which, in this house, they have. 2 envelopes slide forward. 1, Draco Malfoy, Malfoy Manor. The other, Harry Potter, Malfoy Manor. Lucius's hand covers both with aristocratic efficiency, but his eyes betray him. They linger on Harry's name a fraction too long, as if weighing the power of the ink itself. Imagine the psychological fracture in that tiny pause. Heir by blood on the left, weapon by prophecy on the right. Harry watches. He notes the hesitation, the minute tightening at the corner of Narcissa's mouth, the way Draco leans in, possessive, as though Hogwarts is his birthright and Harry is merely an invited guest. Identity, which has always been complicated for this boy, Potter scar, Malfoy manners, suddenly feels like a legal question. Who is being summoned? The savior the world expects, or the polished Slytherin in training his guardians have engineered? The core issue is mechanical. Hogwarts represents a new structure of authority, a new hierarchy of loyalty. For 11 years, Narcissa has been his primary lens on magic, on power, on what it means to survive a Dark Lord and a headmaster, both. Now, an institution controlled by Albus Dumbledore is formally claiming jurisdiction over her child. Narcissa smiles as the boys open their letters, but the subtext is brutal. She knows exactly whose territory Hogwarts is. She hears Dumbledore in every elegant loop of Minerva McGonagall's signature. This is the moment her monopoly on Harry's worldview begins to erode. Tutors can be vetted. House tables cannot. Draco will swim in water he was bred for. Harry will be watched from every angle, by Slytherins, by Gryffindors, by staff who remember another Potter. Harry feels it too, though he would never articulate it this clinically. There is excitement, of course. He has spent years imagining the castle from Draco's storybooks and Lucius's carefully curated anecdotes. There is fear, quiet and sharp, at the idea of sleeping in a dormitory where Narcissa's wand cannot reach him in seconds. And there is curiosity, almost guilty. Will they see him as Harry Potter, the legend, or as the boy who walks like a Malfoy and knows which fork to use for Dragonstake? As the practicalities are discussed, robes, books, whether they will take the train or a more dignified route, Lucius's gaze keeps circling back to Harry. Finally, as Draco is dispatched to write to his friends, Lucius lays his cane across the table with deliberate care. "Harry," he says, voice light but edged, "a word, if you please, in private. We should discuss how a Malfoy behaves at Hogwarts." He does not correct himself. He does not say Potter, and that, more than the letters, is where the turning point arrives. Lucius's lecture on how a Malfoy behaves is not a conversation. It is a calibration. By the time the manor gates give way to the crooked bricks of the leaky cauldron, Harry understands that this trip is not about discovering magic. It is about being seen. In canon, Diagon Alley is a revelation. Cauldrons, owls, the first dizzying proof that Harry belongs. Here, the core issue is mechanical. Harry has known magic all his life. The silent glide of house elves, the polished cruelty of pure-blood dinner parties, the casual hexes Draco practices on beetles. What he has not seen is the full social ecosystem that those rituals support. Diagon Alley is not wonder. It is hierarchy made visible. As they step through the brick wall, the alley reacts. Some witches bow, shallow and precise. A wizard in sober green robes inclines his head to Lucius, gaze flicking over Harry's scar with clinical interest. Others look away too quickly, their loyalty to the Ministry or to Dumbledore making their necks stiffen. Harry watches, cataloguing. Who smiles at Narcissa? Who laughs too loudly at Lucius's remarks? Who pretends not to notice the serpent-headed cane? Near the entrance, Hagrid looms, exactly where canon would place him, but his role has been rewritten. He is speaking to a Muggle-born family, hands gentle, voice low. When he spots the Malfoys, the dynamic shifts. His shoulders tighten, his eyes harden. Lucius's mouth curls in a thin, almost bored smile. "Still keeping half-giants in public view, are they?" Lucius murmurs, just loud enough. The subtext is brutal. Harry feels Hagrid's gaze on the scar, then on the tailored robe with its Malfoy crest. In another timeline, this is where Hagrid buys him ice cream and names his owl. Here, they exchange a nod that is not quite greeting, not quite challenge. Imagine the psychological fracture for a boy who has been told Hagrid is dangerous, yet can see plainly the instinctive protectiveness in the man's stance. At Gringotts, reality becomes more complicated. The goblins are polite to Lucius but respectful to Harry. 2 vaults, 2 identities. The Potter Vault opens on Dumbledore's old arrangements. Gold piled high, artifacts sealed away in deeper chambers Lucius cannot access without elaborate, humiliating negotiations. The Malfoy Vault, by contrast, is an exhibition of generational power. Heirlooms, cursed silver, neatly documented investments, freedom on one side, a leash on the other. Narcissa watches Harry as he absorbs this structure. "Both are yours," she says quietly in the cart's rattle. "But remember who raised you." It is not a threat. That makes it worse. On the alley, the Weasleys appear like a visual rebuttal. Too many children, second-hand robes, genuine laughter. Lucius seizes the opportunity. "Ah, the Weasleys. Proof that breeding without means is a public hazard." Draco snickers on cue. Harry's mouth follows, but the sound tastes wrong. He notes the way the tallest redhead, Percy, flushes and looks away, and the way the mother squares her shoulders, shielding the smallest girl. In another world, these are his future allies. Here, they are collateral in a performance he is required to applaud. The turning point arrives in flourish and blots. While Draco drags him toward the Quidditch books, Harry's eye catches a locked glass case. Advanced defensive theories. bloodline rituals. And, half hidden, a slender volume bound in green-black leather, practical applications of the dark arts. Lucius's reflection appears beside his in the glass. A clerk appears without being summoned. There is no discussion, only a quiet, coded exchange and a discreet wrapping charm. The book vanishes into Lucius's cloak. Certain branches of magic are best learned with proper guidance, Lucius says lightly. Harry does not ask which branches, or whose guidance. But as he imagines Hogwarts, Snape's gaze, the Slytherin common room, the whispers following his scar, one question begins to crystallize. Is this the path expected of him, or the path being engineered? He follows the Malfoys back into the crowd, not noticing that one small Weasley girl is watching him watch the book. And that, quietly, another fracture in his identity has already begun. Ollivanders is not a shop so much as a reliquary of decisions. Dust hangs in the air like waiting verdicts as Harry steps over the threshold. Lucius and Draco a pale aristocratic shadow at his back. In canon, this is the moment of pure wonder. But here the reality is heavier. This is the first time the boy who lived chooses something in public, under Malfoy supervision. Lucius stands with practiced ease, cane tapping once on the floorboards, a metronome of expectation. Draco watches Harry not as a stranger, but as a brother whose performance reflects on the family. Imagine the psychological fracture in that dynamic. Harry is both heir and hostage, both living symbol and dependent child. Every box Ollivander opens feels to him like another test of loyalty. The core issue is mechanical. One law insists that the wand chooses the wizard, but Harry has been trained to let others choose for him. The first wand, slender, pale with a whisper of unicorn hair, rests in his hand like a question. When Ollivander prompts him to think of home, Harry does not picture Godric's hollow. He pictures Narcissa, cool fingers on his fevered forehead. The wand glows, a soft maternal warmth that spreads up his arm, then sputters, rejecting him as his thoughts drift, unbidden, to the dark mark on Lucius's arm. The second wand responds differently. Darker wood, dragon heartstring. Ollivander's eyes narrow as he places it in Harry's hand. This time, Lucius quietly suggests he imagine honoring the family name. Harry, almost in defiance, imagines instead standing in the Great Hall and refusing Dumbledore's guidance, turning away from that twinkling gaze. Power crackles at his fingertips. A sharp ozone tang floods the air. A nearby stack of boxes bursts open, sending wands clattering like startled birds. Draco laughs, a little too loudly. Lucius does not. Ollivander studies Harry with the wary fascination of a man who has seen this pattern before. When he finally brings out the phoenix feather and holly, his tone shifts. No flamboyant proclamation, no delighted theatrics, just a quiet, almost clinical observation. This wand shares a core with another. A wand that has done terrible, great magic. He does not say Voldemort with the Malfoys present. The omission is louder than the name. He lets the holly wand rest in Harry's palm. It fits. The shop seems to inhale. Ollivander's gaze flicks, just once to Lucius, then back. Curious, he murmurs, but the word is weighted differently. Holly leans toward protection, to shielding what one loves, and yet this core listens very closely when power speaks. The subtext is brutal. Protection and domination braided into 11 inches of polished possibility. This should be the turning point where awe floods Harry, where destiny feels tangible. Instead, a thin blade of fear slides under his ribs. The wand does not simply choose him, it feels as though it is examining him in return, probing the fracture lines in his identity. For a heartbeat, he has the uncanny sensation that the phoenix feather is not pledging loyalty but asking a question. Who will you protect? And from whom? He tightens his grip, forcing the connection to settle, presenting a composed mask to Lucius and Draco. But as they leave the shop, the wand's weight in his hand is not comforting. It is conditional, and that quiet, inexplicable dread will echo later when another phoenix feather sings in Voldemort's hand and the true cost of this choice is deconstructed. Because when we deconstruct a timeline, sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not the dark artifact on the mantelpiece, but the wand that still hasn't decided which half of your soul it serves. The wand chooses the wizard, we're told, but the platform chooses the legend. When the turning point arrives at King's Cross, there is no lost boy pushing a rattling trolley in clothes several sizes too big. There is a formation. Lucius Malfoy cuts through the Muggle crowd like a blade. Narcissa a pale, composed orbit at his side, and between them walk two heirs, Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter, robes tailored, crests immaculate, trunks levitating in their wake with quiet, controlled magic. People do not stare because they are curious, they stare because they recognize the scar and the surname beside it, and because the subtext is brutal. The boy who lived has arrived bracketed by old money and older loyalties. Imagine the psychological fracture for the onlookers who still remember James Potter laughing in scarlet and gold. Now his son steps through the barrier flanked by a former Death Eater, and the woman who will one day lie to Voldemort himself. On platform 9 3/4, the Weasleys are still a riot of hand-me-down jumpers and mismatched trunks, the warm, chaotic counterpoint to Malfoy precision. Molly's voice rises over the steam as she counts heads. Ginny bounces on her toes, and the twins choreograph some minor catastrophe with the ease of long practice. Harry hears the laughter first. It lands in him like déjà vu from a life he never lived. But the core issue is mechanical. His social structure has already been engineered. Lucius steers them toward the front of the train, where old families traditionally claim territory. A compartment door opens as if by right. A house elf has already ensured it is empty. Within minutes, Draco and Harry occupy a polished, private space that functions as both sanctuary and signal. This compartment is not for everyone. It is for people who understand power. In canon, Harry's isolation drives him into Ron's orbit. Here, he does not wander. Students pass their door, glance at the silver hair, the black hair, the flash of a serpent ring on Draco's hand, and keep moving. Even those who might be tempted to knock perform a quick psychological calculus and decide against it. So the first intrusion is orchestrated. A Slytherin fifth year, perhaps a Knot or a Burke, slides the door open with practiced ease, sent by parents who recognize the new dynamic forming. Polite greetings, rehearsed compliments about Narcissa's hospitality, a measured welcome to our house for Draco and to our side for Harry. The message is clear. Your identity has been pre-assigned. Then comes the anomaly. Hermione Granger, hair frizzing in the damp air, clutching a charms textbook already bristling with notes. She hesitates, knocks anyway and asks, voice too bright, too fast, whether either of them knows an efficient way to mend a cracked wand-tip she read about. It is an excuse, an attempt to breach the invisible line. Draco's disdain is immediate. Harry's curiosity is quieter, buried under habit and loyalty. Across the corridor, a red-headed boy in second-hand robes watches. Ron has already failed to find a seat where he feels he belongs. He sees Harry's profile, the scar half hidden by expensive fabric, the easy way Draco sprawls like the carriage belongs to him, and he reads the tableau with painful accuracy. That lot won't want you. Harry, meanwhile, keeps being pulled back by the sound of Weasley laughter, by Molly fussing over a sandwich, by a twin performing a clumsy bit of magic that somehow feels more honest than the polished demonstrations he's seen at Malfoy dinners. He imagines, without quite knowing why, sitting there instead, trading pumpkin pasties for stories. He does not move. Loyalty is a habit, and his has been trained to sit beside Draco. As the train lurches forward, steam swallowing the platform, there is a moment, brief, charged, when Harry looks up and Ron looks in. Their eyes meet across glass and corridor and centuries of class structure. In another reality, this is the instant a friendship ignites over shared awkwardness and a packed lunch. In this one, we deconstruct a timeline where both boys look away first, each convinced the other already has a world that doesn't need him. The Great Hall receives him as an anomaly. Harry Potter walks between the tables, not as the skinny, bewildered boy of canon, but as a Malfoy. His robes are immaculate, his posture drilled by tutors and pure-blood etiquette, his stride unconsciously matched to Draco's at his side. Yet above that carefully curated silhouette, the scar is not theoretical. It is a visible fracture in reality, the reminder that this polished child once survived what obliterated a Dark Lord. Whispers move first in pockets, then in waves. Gryffindors lean over roast potatoes gone cold. Hufflepuffs abandon their quiet loyalty to decorum. Even Ravenclaws miscalculate the volume of their curiosity. Slytherin, of course, pretends not to stare, but the subtext is brutal. Here is the boy who lived, arriving like an heir, returning to his ancestral hall, flanked by a Malfoy, not a Weasley. When the hat drops over his eyes, the sound of the hall recedes and another structure of magic takes over. The ancient, sentient voice that has watched 1,000 wars begin at this very bench. Well, the hat murmurs into his skull and Harry flinches at the intimacy. What have they made of you? It tastes the surface first. Slytherin polish, the reflexive calculation of entrances and exits, the instinct to measure power in every room. This is Draco's influence, Lucius's lectures, the endless dinners where names are ranked like hexes. But beneath that, coiled and stubborn, is something older than Malfoy Manor. Courage. A Gryffindor's readiness to step between danger and the people he has claimed as his. The core issue is mechanical. Which layer is the true operating system and which is the defensive shell built by trauma and training? Is the ambition to excel in potions and politics, or the deeper, quieter ambition to protect the one person who ever chose him? Narcissa? The hat sifts through memories not as a montage, but as an autopsy. A pale woman bending over a crib in the wreckage of Godric's Hollow, refusing to leave the screaming child even as Lucius hisses about witnesses. A boy at 5, wandless, facing Lucius's temper after an accidental burst of wild magic shatters a decanter, only for Narcissa to step between them, voice like ice, claiming the blame. Imagine the psychological fracture of learning that love is both shield and leverage. Narcissa, the hat thinks his name for her, tasting that fierce, possessive loyalty. Not marked by the Dark Lord, but bound by older oaths, family, lineage, survival. It can feel how Harry's identity hooks around her like ivy around stone. What happens when that love is tested against prophecy, against the demands of 2 wars, one public, one domestic? Gryffindor calls to the raw nerve of him. The part that wants to stand up in the Great Hall and say, out loud, that some of the jokes Draco repeats about mudbloods make his stomach hurt. Ravenclaw briefly is tempted by the way he has turned pure-blood etiquette into strategy, cataloguing who interrupts whom, who flinches at which name, building a mental map of social weak points. And Slytherin? Slytherin feels like gravity, the default setting. The house of his pseudo-brother, of his father's expectations, of the drawing room where he learned the subtler magics of silence and survival. The turning point arrives not in a shout, but in a quiet memory. Narcissa, late at night, smoothing his hair after a nightmare about green light, whispering, "You are mine to protect." The hat weighs it. Protection as control. Protection as salvation. Very well then, it decides the decision a precise cut through tangled loyalties. You will be... The brim splits. It shouts, "Slytherin!" The word hits the hall like a curse. Not Avada Kedavra, no green light, no falling body, but a quieter execution of expectation. In canon, this is the moment Harry's protest saves him. Here, the protest never comes. The hat has read a boy raised in a house where mercy is a liability and subtlety is oxygen, and it chooses the only house engineered for his survival in that reality. The core issue is mechanical. This Harry has been trained, almost from infancy, to read a room the way other children read picture books. Pure-blood etiquette, Malfoy dinner politics, the silent language of who stands when Lucius enters. Gryffindor would ask him to unlearn the only structure that has ever kept him safe. Slytherin, the hat reasons, will not make him betray his own adaptive instincts just to fit a narrative about bravery. Gasps ripple first from the Gryffindor table, a collective intake of breath from children who have grown up on bedtime stories of the boy who lived. The legend was supposed to wear red and gold, but he is already walking toward green and silver, the House of Dark Marks, and whispered slurs. At Ravenclaw, quills pause mid-scratch as minds begin recalculating every moral equation they have been handed. Hufflepuff stares, uneasy, as the supposed villain house acquires the war's most potent symbol. At the staff table, Dumbledore's expression flickers. Concern, opportunity, then something colder and more resigned. He is watching his canonical strategy disintegrate in real time. No Gryffindor common room, no easy access to Weasley loyalty, no straightforward mentorship under McGonagall. If we deconstruct a timeline, this is the frame where his entire long game has to be rewritten on the fly. Draco's reaction is a study in psychological whiplash. For a heartbeat, there is pure, unfiltered relief. His brother figure, the boy he has shared tutors and tantrums and secret midnight broom rides with, will not be exiled across the house divide. Then the subtext is brutal. As the Slytherin table erupts in satisfied applause, some smug, some hungry, Harry is not just welcomed, he is claimed. Eyes that once orbited Draco as Malfoy heir now pivot inexorably to the boy who lived. Imagine the psychological fracture. Draco has spent 11 years rehearsing an identity. Lucius's son, future power broker, center of the Manor's gravitational field. Overnight, Harry becomes the more valuable Malfoy asset, the living proof that Slytherin can produce not only Dark Lords, but chosen ones. Their dynamic is no longer simple brotherhood. It is rivalry braided with loyalty and trauma. The power map of Hogwarts redraws itself before dessert. Slytherin gains a living banner, a weaponized narrative. If the boy who lived belongs with them, then perhaps the old binaries of light and dark were propaganda all along. Gryffindor, by contrast, loses its mythic hero and must confront a quieter, more uncomfortable reality. Courage will not be branded for them this year. Pattern interrupt. Cut away from the jubilant Slytherin table to the Gryffindor bench, where an empty space gapes between Ron Weasley and an unclaimed spot by the fire. No messy black hair, no awkward smile, no instant trio crystallizing around shared danger. It is a visual absence that feels like a wound in canon itself, a missing hinge on which the war once turned. And in that emptiness, the question sharpens. If the boy who lived grows in the shadows instead of the light, who, exactly, is Hogwarts being prepared to follow? The emptiness in the Great Hall does not last long. It is filled almost violently when the dungeon doors swing open and Severus Snape sees what Hogwarts has inherited instead. Black Slytherin robes, silver and green tie, Malfoy perfect posture, and inside that frame James Potter's face, sharpened by pure blood etiquette and Malfoy discipline. The collision is almost obscene. Imagine the psychological fracture in Snape's mind. The boy he swore to protect, walking in like a polished echo of the house that once applauded his humiliation. The first potions lesson becomes an autopsy of divided loyalties. Snape sweeps between tables, voice low and cutting, but there is a new calculus in his cruelty. Lily's eyes in James's skull, James's hair above a Slytherin crest, and behind all of it, Narcissa Malfoy, no dark mark but a presence in every Death Eater drawing room. A woman who once stood beside him as Lucius whispered plans. He owes Dumbledore a promise. He owes Lily a life. He owes Narcissa, at minimum, a wary respect. The core issue is mechanical. In canon, he targets Harry publicly, theatrically, to hurt James's memory and to keep the boy away from him. Here, the classroom becomes a controlled experiment. Less public humiliation, more surgical testing. He praises Draco's neat dicing of daisy roots, then turns almost idly and remarks that some families purchase talent with gold and influence, others squander it with reckless heroics and dead arrogance. The subtext is brutal. Every word is a scalpel. Harry waits for the warmth of house favoritism that has always orbited the Malfoy name. He expects the structure he knows. Slytherin's protected, Gryffindor's mocked, the Malfoy heir untouchable. But Snape's gaze treats him as volatile, not precious. When he deliberately insults James, your father's mediocrity was legendary, Potter. Snape watches not for hurt, but for allegiance. Does the boy flinch at the wound to the Potters, or at the potential stain on his Malfoy-adjacent prestige? Harry's answer is silence. His jaw tightens, but his hand does not slip, and his potion remains perfectly stirred. That restraint is not Gryffindor defiance, it is Malfoy training. Power must be hidden until it is useful. Yet something in him twists at the insult, a faint, unarticulated grief for a father he has been taught to regard as a cautionary tale rather than a martyr. So Snape adjusts the variables. He lets slip a cool, approving comment about Narcissa's unquestionable loyalty and discretion, and notes the way Harry's shoulders ease, the fractionally deeper breath. Praise for his guardian lands, contempt for his father lodges like shrapnel. We deconstruct a timeline where Snape is not simply a bully, but an analyst mapping fault lines in a child's identity. The turning point arrives after class in the quiet hum of bottled ingredients and lingering steam. Harry, packing away his things, pauses over an old advanced potion-making text left on the side bench, its margins crowded with a stranger's sharp handwriting. His eyes snag on a single underlined name in a cramped note: Lily Evans. Snape sees the hesitation, the way the boy's fingers hover, not over Evans, but over Lily, as though the name itself is a spell he has never been allowed to cast. Reality narrows. The professor's eyes harden, then narrow, the air between them thick with unspoken history and danger. This, he realizes, is not Lucius's fixed weapon. This is an unstable equation. And if Harry Potter is already reaching, however unconsciously, for the ghost of Lily, then the war for his loyalty has barely begun. Snape snaps the book shut with a flick of his wand and a quiet, lethal question. Interested in old names, are we, Mr. Potter? Harry swallows. Caught. He does not yet know that from this moment on, every answer he gives will be measured against a dead woman's memory and against the future Narcissa thinks she is buying. Snape's question still hangs in the air when the Hogwarts year begins to answer it for him, not in essays or detentions, but in seating charts and house tables. Harry Potter does not walk into Gryffindor surrounded by awe and possibility. He slides onto the Slytherin bench, shoulder to shoulder with Draco Malfoy, under a banner of silver and green that quietly rewrites the mythology of the boy who lived. In canon, Harry's isolation is social. Here, his isolation is structural. His very presence in Slytherin is a political act. Draco feels that power immediately. He becomes Harry's informal handler, narrating which family names to nod to, which to ignore, which professors can be safely mocked, and which must be feared. Harry, raised on Narcissa's immaculate etiquette and Lucius's veiled threats, understands that the core issue is mechanical. Survival in this house depends on reading unspoken alliances faster than anyone can say mudblood. So he lets Draco talk. He lets Draco bask in reflected glory, the Malfoy heir presenting the Potter heir as if unveiling a family acquisition. Imagine the psychological fracture at the Slytherin table when older students stare. Half of them see a weapon reclaimed for their cause. The other half see a destabilizing variable Dumbledore might have planted. Harry sees only a porcelain plate, a goblet, and Draco's running commentary. His laughter, when it comes, is quiet and carefully calibrated. It is the laugh of someone who knows that every expression is being scored. Across the hall, Hermione Granger is sorted, Gryffindor in this version, though Ravenclaw would have claimed her just as eagerly. She has read about Harry Potter, about the Malfoys, about the war. The dynamic fascinates her. When she approaches him after charms, it is with questions about magic theory, about how it feels to be raised in a house aligned with the losing side. Harry hesitates. This finally sounds like a real conversation. Draco ends it before it begins. A single derisive glance at her parentage, a murmured slur, and the door slams shut. Harry's silence in that moment is not agreement. It is capitulation to the only social structure he has ever known. The subtext is brutal. Loyalty in Slytherin is measured by who you do not defend. Ron Weasley watches all of this from a distance that feels increasingly permanent. In another timeline, he would have been the first hand Harry shook on the train. Here, he sees only a famous boy laughing beside his childhood rival, cloaked in the colours his family distrusts. Ron's own insecurities, about money, about hand-me-downs, about being the sixth son, find an easy target. Harry's constrained, hyper-managed behaviour reads as arrogance, not trauma. A rivalry calcifies where friendship should have been. Yet Slytherin is not a monolith of cruelty. Theodore Nott, quiet and watchful, occasionally trades dry observations with Harry about the absurdity of pure blood posturing. Daphne Greengrass, whose family plays both sides in whispers, asks careful questions that suggest she sees the fracture between Harry's Malfoy manners and his Potter conscience. Through them, Harry glimpses that even in this house, identity is negotiated, not dictated. The turning point arrives in the library. Shelves tower, candles gutter, and Harry, returning a book on magical lore Narcissa insisted he study, hears his name. "He's not what I expected," Hermione says, voice low but intense. "Yeah, well," Ron mutters, He's made his choice, hasn't he? Malfoy's shadow, Malfoy's rules. Harry freezes in the aisle, fingers tightening on the spine of a book that traces who owns which power in Wizarding Britain. For the first time, he realizes that to people who do not know Narcissa, he looks like Lucius's project, not Lily's son. He could walk away, retreat into the safety of Draco's orbit and the scripts written for him. Or he could step around the shelf and begin an entirely different life. He takes a breath. And then, Simum. He steps onto the Quidditch pitch. Not in third year as a late-blooming Gryffindor prodigy, but in the first crisp weeks of autumn, when most 11-year-olds are still getting lost between charms and transfiguration. The Slytherin team is running drills, Flint barking orders, brooms hovering in neat militaristic lines. Harry is supposed to be in the stands, observing pure-blood leisure as another lesson in Malfoy identity. Instead, a rogue bludger veers toward a first year, and his body moves before his pedigree can catch up. He kicks off on a borrowed broom with none of the hesitancy of a boy raised in a cupboard. This Harry has flown manicured lawns and private paddocks under Narcissa's watchful eye. His dive is clean, predatory, the kind of motion that makes older players swear under their breath. He doesn't think about magic, or house, or power structures. He thinks about impact, trajectory, air. The core issue is mechanical. He reaches the bludger in time, bats it away with a reckless, bare-handed smack that leaves his palm throbbing and Flint staring. The captain's mind calculates faster than the bludger ever did. A first year who can track velocity like that? That is not a luxury. That is a weapon. From that moment, we deconstruct a timeline where the recruitment war begins before Minerva McGonagall ever witnesses a single forbidden dive. Flint is in Snape's office by nightfall, arguing that Slytherin has found its seeker, and that for once, they will not let Gryffindor poach a talent on the grounds of moral superiority. McGonagall hears rumours, sharpens her own plans, and realises the political reality. Losing Harry Potter to Slytherin on the ground is one thing. Losing him in the air, publicly, is another. By the first official match, the symbolism is obvious. The boy who lived circles the stadium in Slytherin green, and every pair of eyes recalibrates. Is he the saviour wearing serpent colours, or the serpent wearing a saviour's scar? Every catch, every feint becomes a referendum on who deserves the hero of the wizarding world. The subtext is brutal. When Slytherin faces Gryffindor, the fracture sharpens. Harry hovers opposite a team that, in another reality, would have been his family. He watches the Weasley twins joke with their captain, sees the way Gryffindor rallies around courage rather than calculation, and something in him stirs. Imagine the psychological fracture of recognizing your almost life flying in enemy colors. He feels an ache he cannot name even as he hears Draco's voice roaring his name from the Slytherin stands. The crowd reactions expose the deeper dynamic. Some Hufflepuffs and Gryffindors boo him on sight as if Slytherin robes have retroactively rewritten his survival as suspect. Others, particularly younger students and a surprising number of Ravenclaws, idolize him regardless of house, tracking his movements with hungry fascination. In the same roar of the stadium, Harry hears both condemnation and worship, realizing that the good/evil binary collapses the moment the snitch is released. The turning point arrives during a brutal, rain-slicked match where Slytherin trails and morale frays. Harry dives through a curtain of water, fingers closing around gold inches from the mud. The stadium explodes. Green and silver banners whip the air. Draco is on his seat, screaming himself hoarse. Harry looks up through the rain and finds Dumbledore watching him. Not with pride, with calculation, as if the headmaster is already adjusting pieces on an invisible board. Harry shivers, though he is not cold. Being a symbol, he realizes, is not the same as being safe. The Quidditch roar fades, but the calculation in Dumbledore's eyes does not. The school moves on, as it always does, but the information flow around Harry changes. In Gryffindor, rumours drift upward from pranksters and prefects. In Slytherin, they descend like directives. Older students return from late-night patrols, whispering about new wards pulsing along the third-floor corridor, about Flitwick and McGonagall arguing in clipped, terrified voices, about Hagrid hauling in a three-headed dog as if that is a normal Tuesday in British magical education. The core issue is mechanical. Slytherin House is a pressure cooker for secrets. Its very structure rewards those who know more than they should. Harry sits at the table, quiet, listening as the 7th year mentions Gringotts, the break-in, and a small, grubby package that Hagrid allegedly withdrew that same day. The details are half true, half invented, but the pattern is there. Power is being moved, and Hogwarts is suddenly part vault, part battlefield. Draco's reaction is almost clinically revealing. He is fascinated, but not by the ethics of immortality or the trauma of someone stealing life itself. He wants to know whether his father had prior knowledge, whether the Board of Governors will be informed, whether Slytherin will be praised for vigilance, or blamed for negligence if something goes wrong. For Draco, the question is simple. Does this elevate the Malfoy name or threaten it? Harry's questions run in a different direction. Imagine the psychological fracture of realizing that the safest place you have ever known might be hiding something worth killing for. He watches Snape glide through the corridors, robes snapping, and hears Slytherins mutter about their head of house being on Dumbledore's special business. In canon, Harry's suspicion would lock onto Snape as the obvious villain. Here, raised on Narcissa's cool assessments and Lucius's veiled contempt for weak men, he looks instead at Quirrell. The stutter, the smell of garlic, the eyes that never quite meet his. A man who returned from a year abroad with a tremor and a turban. In a house trained to see masks, Quirrell's performance is sloppy. Harry does not exonerate Snape, but he does something more dangerous. He holds two possibilities in his mind at once. This is where the alternate investigation team forms almost by accident. Draco, hungry for prestige and gossip. Harry, hungry for truth. And a third Slytherin, perhaps a half-blood like Theodore Nott, or a rule-conscious Daphne Greengrass, dragged along with visible moral unease. They piece together clues from overheard staff arguments, from Filch's complaints about bloody extra protections, from the way Cerberus-level growls echo faintly through stone on certain nights. Harry supplements this with quieter, almost illicit data collection. In Charms, Hermione Granger answers a question about ancient alchemical objects with textbook precision, mentioning the Philosopher's Stone, Elixir of Life, and Nicholas Flamel. Harry files the name away, then cross-checks it later with Draco in the library, pretending it came from a Malfoy dinner conversation. Loyalty in Slytherin is often indistinguishable from plausible deniability. The turning point arrives when Harry connects the stone to the Gringotts break-in, and, more importantly, to the word that has haunted his life: Voldemort. If someone is seeking a way back to power, if the stone can rebuild a body or sustain a parasitic existence, then the mystery in the third-floor corridor is not academic. It is personal. He lies awake in the Slytherin dorm, green light rippling across the ceiling, and understands something brutal. Whoever is after the stone might be linked to the man who murdered his parents. And once again, the adults, Dumbledore, Snape, even Narcissa by omission, are moving pieces on a board without telling him the rules. We deconstruct a timeline in which Harry decides he will not be a passive piece. He will be a player. And that decision is what drags Slytherin House into the heart of the first war-level secret. Harry's decision to become a player, not a piece, doesn't begin in a duel or a council of war. It begins in silence, in stone, in the forgotten arteries of the castle, where even Slytherins do not bother to wander. Detention with Filch is the pretext, but the path is curated. A misdirected staircase, a tapestry that seems to billow just a second too long, a door that should be locked and simply isn't. Whether this is the castle's own magic or Dumbledore's quiet choreography is debatable, but the effect is the same. Harry is siphoned away from the dungeons, away from Draco's watchful loyalty and Snape's hovering scrutiny, into a corridor of dust and disuse. At the end of it waits the mirror. He expects, if he expects anything, power. A Slytherin heir crowned in emerald and silver. Dark artifacts obedient at his fingertips. Lucius's hand on his shoulder in cold approval. That is the identity the Manor has been engineering since he could walk. But when he steps in front of the glass, the fantasy fractures. He sees himself. Not older, not grander, just Harry. On his left, Lily and James Potter, alive, unscarred, their hands resting lightly on his arm. On his right, Narcissa and Draco Malfoy, composed, immaculate, standing close enough that their sleeves brush his. The two families form a loose circle around him, and in the reflection, They are not opposing forces. They are talking. Imagine the psychological fracture for a boy who has spent his entire life being told that these worlds cannot coexist. James is laughing at something Draco has said. Lily is leaning toward Narcissa, not in accusation, but in quiet, intent conversation. Lucius is absent. The Dark Mark is absent. Even the faint tension Harry associates with pure blood gatherings has been erased. There is no war in this image, no prophecy, no Dark Lord. There is only the impossible. The Potters and the Malfoys smiling at each other, and no one asking him to choose. The subtext is brutal. Harry realizes with a kind of cold, clinical horror that he does not crave a throne or a wand of unmatched power. He wants a dining table where Lily can pass Draco the salt and Narcissa can ask James about Quidditch scores without anyone reaching for a wand. He wants a structure of family that does not require ideological mutilation. When Dumbledore speaks from the shadows, Harry almost isn't surprised. Of course the headmaster is here. Of course he has been waiting to see what the boy raised in Malfoy Manor desires when no one is watching. Their conversation diverges from canon immediately. Dumbledore does not warn him about obsession with the past. He studies the reflection and then Harry with a kind of tired curiosity. The core issue is mechanical. A child balanced between two moral gravitational fields, searching for a configuration in which neither collapses. You do not seek glory, Dumbledore observes quietly. You seek a family that will not demand your allegiance as a weapon. Harry says nothing, because it is true. The turning point arrives not with an offer, but with an omission. Dumbledore does not tell him which side to choose. He simply turns away, murmuring, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are." Then, almost to himself as he walks off into the dark, the question is, when the moment comes, which family will you choose to betray in order to be yourself? Harry is left staring at the mirror, at two futures that cannot both exist, realizing that one day he will have to make that choice, and that neither Narcissa nor the parents he lost will be standing beside him when he does. We deconstruct a timeline where that future choice doesn't wait for the final war. It begins in first year, and the castle is already moving the pieces. And one night it moves Draco Malfoy to the edge of courage and stops. The trapdoor is open. The dog sleeps under the influence of a carefully pilfered potion. Harry stands on the threshold with Draco, the air thick with the smell of drool and the weight of every pure blood rule Narcissa ever drilled into him. In canon, Gryffindors tumble through on adrenaline and half-baked plans. But here, the core issue is mechanical. Which heir is willing to risk the family name? Draco's hand shakes as he looks down into the darkness. He imagines his father's face, the headlines, the fracture in Malfoy prestige if they are caught. Harry imagines something else entirely. Quirrell reaching the stone first, Voldemort gaining a new body, and every sacrifice at Godric's Hollow rendered meaningless. Draco mutters that this is Dumbledore's job, that they should inform Snape. Then, with a final brittle, "My father will hear about this," he steps back. The turning point arrives not with a shout, but with a quiet, stunned silence as Harry realizes he is, functionally, alone. He goes anyway. His descent is not a reckless sprint. It is a Slytherin audit of risk. Devil's Snare is not burned away in panic. He remembers a tutor's lecture on plant magic, slows his breathing, and sinks deliberately, leveraging stillness instead of struggle. On the chessboard, he does not play the martyr. He sacrifices pieces with cold precision, treating the board the way Lucius treats politics, as a structure to be navigated, not a stage for heroics. By the time he reaches the final chamber, Harry is not a boy who stumbled into danger. He is a strategist who chose it. Quirrell turns, turban askew, and for a moment the scene plays as expected. Stuttering professor, hissed commands. Then Voldemort speaks, and the subtext is brutal. "Ah," the voice purrs, Narcissa's little project. "Look at you, the bow of the head, the measured tone. Malfoy polish on Potter blood." He offers not just power, but position. The perfect double asset, the child who can walk in Dumbledore's sunlight and sit at the Dark Lord's right hand. Imagine the psychological fracture in that moment. Every lesson in etiquette, Every warning about choosing the winning side, every quiet act of loyalty Narcissa has shown him, weaponized in a single proposition. Who are you, Harry? A Potter relic or Narcissa's son? Harry's refusal is not a Gryffindor roar. It is a controlled, almost impolite number. He will not be Dumbledore's weapon, and he will not be Voldemort's heir. He is done being a pawn on anyone's board, even if he has to burn the board to prove it. The physical confrontation still hurts. Skin blisters, Quirrell screams. The stone is saved. But when Harry wakes, the pattern shatters. It is not Dumbledore's calm gaze that greets him. It is Narcissa Malfoy, eyes red, composure cracked. She has been sitting vigil in the hospital wing, knowing exactly what it means that her ward defied the Dark Lord's whisper. For the first time, Harry understands that his defiance has a target painted on her back, and the war, in his mind, stops being theoretical. We deconstruct a timeline where the boy who lived realizes far too early that every act of independence is also an act of betrayal to someone. The question is no longer whether he will choose a side. It is whether he can survive choosing himself. That question will haunt every year that follows. Summer at Malfoy Manor does not begin with celebration. It begins with a slammed door. Lucius has already read Dumbledore's letter twice by the time Harry is summoned to the study. The room is a shrine to controlled power. Glass-fronted cases of cursed tomes, the serpent-headed cane propped beside the desk, sunlight carefully filtered through leaded windows, so nothing is ever fully illuminated. Harry stands on the Persian rug that has seen generations of Malfoy heirs scolded into obedience. Lucius does not shout. That would imply loss of control. His anger is quieter, more dangerous, a blade sheathed in courtesy. He asks Harry to explain, and when Harry stumbles through the Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell, and the not-quite return of the Dark Lord, Lucius's expression never quite changes. Only his eyes sharpen, calculating. The core issue is mechanical. In his mind, this is not a tale of heroism. It is a ledger of risk. He hears Dumbledore and Stone and Voldemort, and what he registers is leverage. Who sent the centaur? Why was Harry allowed near such magic? What game is the headmaster playing with a boy the Dark Lord already marked? Lucius's questions are precise, surgical. Then the turning point arrives. He leans back, voice almost mild, and tells Harry that when the Dark Lord returns, and Lucius speaks in terms of when, not if, there will be no safety for those who chose poorly. Harry is instructed with chilling delicacy to remember which side has sheltered him, fed him, given him a name. Upstairs, Narcissa is having a different argument with the same reality. She waits until Lucius leaves for the ministry. Then she calls Harry to her private sitting room, a softer space of pale blues and silver, where family portraits watch with oil-painted disapproval. Narcissa is furious in a way Harry has rarely seen. Not theatrical rage, but a tremor in her teacup, a sharpness in every syllable. She demands to know why he didn't write, why she heard about trolls and forbidden corridors from Dumbledore's carefully sanitized note instead of from her son. Imagine the psychological fracture here. Narcissa Malfoy, who once measured loyalty in dark marks and political alliances, is now furious because a boy she stole from a ruined house in Godric's Hollow did not tell her he nearly died. The subtext is brutal. She is terrified. Terrified of losing him to Voldemort, to Dumbledore, to a destiny she did not choose but now cannot escape. And yet, beneath the anger, there is something like pride. She listens, really listens, when Harry insists he was stopping Voldemort, not helping him. For a moment, her hand rests on his shoulder a fraction too long. She does not praise him. That would be dangerous. But she does not forbid his friendships either. Her punishment is paradoxical. Stricter curfews in the manor, more etiquette drills, and quietly, more advanced defensive magic with private tutors. Draco watches all of this from the margins. He had expected to mock Harry for losing points, for detentions, for Gryffindor recklessness. But how do you mock someone who has faced the Dark Lord and come back to a private audience with your father? Draco's admiration is reluctant, corrosive. He resents the way conversations stop when Harry enters a room, the way owls arrive with sealed correspondence addressed to Mr. Potter that he is not allowed to see. Their duels in the garden take on a new edge. Draco pushes harder, his spells snapping with jealousy, while Harry absorbs the blows with a grim focus that has nothing to do with house rivalry and everything to do with survival. The dynamic between them fractures. Not quite brothers, not quite enemies, trapped in a shared childhood that is rapidly diverging. For Harry, this summer is an education in consequences. Every decision made at Hogwarts echoes through the Manor's marble halls. Help a friend, and Narcissa's lessons become both warmer and more suffocating. Defy a teacher, and Lucius's gaze turns colder, his questions more pointed. He begins to understand that his identity is not merely Harry Potter or Malfoy Ward, but a pressure point in a larger war. Every act of loyalty, to Ron, to Hermione, to Narcissa, tightens or loosens invisible chains. By August, Lucius stops pretending Harry is simply a dependent. One evening after dinner, he gestures Harry back into the study. The conversation is shorter this time, more transactional. There are matters, Lucius explains, that concern the family. Ministry initiatives, school improvements, the purity of Hogwarts itself. Harry will be involved, not as a child, but as an asset. He mentions almost casually that the school's reputation has been threatened by a certain Muggle-born problem, and that an old heirloom may soon change the structure of Hogwarts forever. Harry, he says, will have his part to play. We deconstruct a timeline where the Chamber of Secrets is not just a legend under the school, but a shadow cast across the manor long before the first message appears on the wall. The heirloom arrives in Harry's life not as a mystery, but as an assignment. In the manor's drawing room, Lucius turns the diary over in pale fingers, the way another man might weigh a knife. He does not name it as a Horcrux. He calls it a little corrective measure. Harry is instructed almost casually to ensure that Miss Weasley receives this old textbook in flourish and blots. It is framed as a test of etiquette and influence, a Malfoy aiding a respectable pureblood family fallen on hard times. The core issue is mechanical. Harry has been raised inside a structure where obedience is coded as loyalty and hesitation is a flaw. He knows Ginny only as the girl who blushes and drops her cauldron, overwhelmed by the proximity of the boy who lived and the Malfoy crest. Placing the diary into her second-hand transfiguration book feels trivial, even merciful. He tells himself he is helping. Reality will not be so gentle. When the first message appears, the Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Harry experiences a slow, almost physical recoil. Imagine the psychological fracture, the memory of Lucius's cold smile, the weight of the diary in his hand, the echo of the word heirloom. As Muggle-borns are attacked, the manor's language seeps into the corridors of Hogwarts. Slytherins speak of necessary cleansing with the breezy cruelty of children repeating their parents. Draco treats the panic as theatre. He gloats in the common room, predicting which Muggle-born will be next, performing outrage that they were admitted at all. Some Slytherins laugh, leaning into the power of fear like it's a new toy. Others go quiet, disturbed by the pattern but unwilling to fracture house unity. Harry sits between them, his expression schooled, his stomach hollow. He knows that if the diary is involved, he may have placed the weapon. The turning point arrives at the dueling club. Harry speaks Parseltongue. In canon, this is a shock. Here, the reaction is sharply divided by house and history. The Slytherins stare with something close to reverence. A boy raised by Malfoys speaking the language of serpents feels like an omen fulfilled. Outside Slytherin, however, the subtext is brutal. Whispers of heir of Slytherin fuse with Death Eater in training. His identity collapses into a single terrifying possibility. Harry feels the walls closing in. In the dormitory, his bed curtains drawn, he retrieves the diary he quietly lifted back from Ginny's cauldron weeks earlier, unable to fully abandon it, yet unable to confess. Ink slides across the page with unnerving eagerness. Tom Riddle asks his name. Harry hesitates, then writes, Harry Potter, I live with the Malfoys. The ink pauses, as if the book itself is recalibrating. Then the response appears, slower, sharper, each letter like a blade. Potter, raised by Malfoy? We deconstruct a timeline in which the diary is no longer merely a trap for a lonely girl, but a mirror held up to a boy split between two legacies. On the page, Tom's interest crystallizes into focus. He begins to ask questions, not about the chamber, but about Lucius. Harry, for the first time, writes back. Riddle's next sentence will change the entire dynamic of this war. Riddle's next sentence will change the entire dynamic of this war. It is not about the chamber, or the air, or even the basilisks slumbering below their feet. It is a simple question. Tell me, Harry, what would Lucius Malfoy say if he knew you were writing to me? In that moment, the diary stops being a curiosity and becomes a pressure point. Imagine the psychological fracture in a boy who has been taught that secrets are survival, that loyalty is a currency, and that the Malfoy name is both shield and chain. Harry snaps the diary shut, but the damage is done. When Ginny disappears and the castle hums with fear, he knows exactly whose negligence opened the door. His decision to go after her is not framed as Gryffindor heroism. It is an audit of guilt. He remembers Narcissa's hand on his shoulder at the manor, her warning about objects with histories, and realizes he has repeated Lucius's sin on a smaller scale, handing a weapon to a child. The core issue is mechanical. A girl is dying because he wanted answers about himself. So he goes, not because Ginny is a pureblood, not because a Weasley ally might be politically useful in some future Slytherin calculus, but because the image of a small body in a cold chamber feels too close to a nursery in Godric's Hollow. Trauma is a poor moral compass, yet here it drags him in the right direction. In the chamber, the dynamic crystallizes. Tom Riddle steps out of the diary with the easy arrogance of a boy who has never been told no. He circles Harry like a collector appraising a rare artifact. Potter blood, he muses, raised in Malfoy marble. Gryffindor's sacrifice, Slytherin's grooming. You are the solution to a problem I didn't know I had. He mocks the Malfoys with surgical precision. Lucius, the coward who needed a diary to do his dirty work. Narcissa, the sentimental traitor who took in the enemy's child. Draco, the pale imitation of what Harry could be. The subtext is brutal. You are their improvement. You think you belong to them, Tom says softly, but really you belong to me. We are ambition refined by rejection. Let me finish what they started. The turning point arrives not with a spell, but with a refusal. Harry looks at Ginny's still form and realizes that every adult in his life, Dumbledore, Lucius, Voldemort, treats children as pieces on a board. He chooses consciously to step off the board. I'm not here for you, he tells Tom. I'm here for her. Identity, in that instant, detaches from bloodline and house and reattaches to an almost embarrassingly simple ethic. Scared children do not die for other people's wars. When Fawkes appears, it feels less like divine intervention and more like an accusation from a legacy he has been trained to disdain. The Phoenix is Dumbledore's, the Sorting Hat is Gryffindor's, yet they come to a boy in Slytherin green. Reality bends. Magic refuses the binary the houses insist on. As the sword drops into his hand, Harry understands viscerally that power does not care about common room boundaries. He kills the basilisk with a weapon that should have been his by birth and a cunning that was drilled into him by Malfoy tutors. The fracture inside him does not heal, but it gains structure. Canon would have him carried back to Gryffindor Tower in triumph, but Harry walks quietly down to the Slytherin dormitory. On his pillow lies a single piece of parchment, Lucius's handwriting like a curse. We will discuss your choices. The war has noticed him. So have the Malfoys. The confrontation does not happen in a corridor with a sock and a stumble. It happens in the headmaster's office, under the watchful eyes of a phoenix and a family that has just discovered its own fault lines. Lucius Malfoy arrives prepared to intimidate a frail old man and retrieve a cursed artifact. Instead, he finds Harry already there, pale from basilisk venom and victory, the destroyed diary on Dumbledore's desk like a corpse between them. The power dynamic is inverted before a word is spoken. Harry does not wait for Dumbledore to speak. Pure blood etiquette tells him to defer. Trauma tells him that silence enabled this. He steps forward, voice steady in a way that makes Narcissa's hand tighten on Draco's shoulder. He explains in clinical detail how the diary spoke, how it possessed Ginny Weasley, how it opened a chamber Lucius himself once boasted about in half-drunken whispers at Malfoy Manor. Then he says the unthinkable, that Lucius planted it. Imagine the psychological fracture in that room. Draco's head snaps toward his father, eyes wide with an almost childish plea. Deny it. Narcissa's expression does not change, but her knuckles go white. Lucius laughs, low and dangerous, and calls Harry ungrateful. The subtext is brutal. Not just ungrateful ward, unreliable weapon. The turning point arrives when Dobby appears, summoned by Lucius's fury, trying to protect Harry with clumsy, desperate magic. Canon gives us a clever sock trick. Here, the core issue is mechanical. Harry uses the same pure-blood legal structure Lucius drilled into him. He asks calmly whether house elves are bound to obey orders that would facilitate harm to a child under a wizard's guardianship. Dumbledore, with that infuriating mildness, confirms they are not. Dobby is freed not by accident, but by Harry weaponizing the education Lucius paid for. Lucius's rage is incandescent. This is the boy he invested in, the boy he imagined as a polished political blade now turned in his hand. He realizes in real time that Harry is not the compliant asset he intended, but an independent actor with his own moral compass and an intimate knowledge of Malfoy weaknesses. Reality tilts. For Lucius, this is not merely betrayal, it is strategic catastrophe. Draco is left in the wreckage, his father is publicly rebuked, his mother has been seen entering Dumbledore's office alone at odd hours, and the brother figure who taught him shield charms has just exposed their family's darkest dealings. How does a 12-year-old process that his bedtime stories about the old ways nearly killed a girl in his year? He does what many children do under unbearable cognitive dissonance. He blames everyone at once. Narcissa cannot afford that luxury. Caught between her husband's fury and her son's safety, she tracks the lines of power with cold precision. Voldemort may be gone, but his shadow is not. Lucius is tethered to that shadow. Harry, terrifyingly, is tethered to the prophecy she suspects and the affection she did not plan to feel. That night she visits Dumbledore alone. No chaperone, no husband, no mask. In the quiet of the office, she asks a question she has never voiced. What happens when Voldemort returns? And then, more quietly still, she makes a request she will never repeat to Lucius, that whatever side Harry chooses, his life be protected, even from the Malfoy name. We deconstruct a timeline from that whispered bargain forward. The whispered bargain in Dumbledore's office does not stay abstract for long. Its first real test arrives with a headline: Sirius Black escapes Azkaban. But Harry does not see it on a prophet at the leaky cauldron. He hears it in the Manor's blue drawing room, in Lucius's voice, framed as a security briefing. In this reality, Sirius is not the tragic godfather waiting to be reclaimed. He is presented as the archetypal traitor, the man who sold James and Lily to the Dark Lord, then slaughtered innocents in a fit of fanatic loyalty. Lucius speaks of him the way one might speak of a cursed artifact, dangerous, unstable, and, crucially, interested in Harry. The implication is clear: if Black comes anywhere, he will come to Malfoy Manor to finish what he started. Protection is promised. Wardings are reinforced. Harry is told he is safe. He does not feel safe. Anger comes first, clean and almost comforting. This is the man, he thinks, who fractured his life before it began. But anger, in a Slytherin-raised boy, never remains simple. Imagine the psychological fracture when Harry notices the seams in the narrative. The way Lucius dodges questions about old allegiances. The way Narcissa's eyes flicker when Sirius's name is spoken. The way Dumbledore, at the welcoming feast, calls Black desperate rather than devoted. Both sides are talking in careful half-truths. Both sides are curating his hatred. Then the Dementors arrive and the conversation becomes physiological. The core issue is mechanical. Their presence does not only drag him back to the echo of his mother's scream. It drags him into corridors at Malfoy Manor, where robed figures argued about prophecies and bloodlines while they assumed the child in the next room was asleep. It drags him to the memory of a house elf's hand shaking as it bandaged his arm after a pure-blood etiquette lesson went too far. Trauma in this timeline is not a single night. It is a structure. On the train, Harry does not just hear Voldemort's laughter. He hears Lucius's measured contempt, Bellatrix's wild devotion, and buried under it, Narcissa's voice asking if the boy has eaten. The subtext is brutal. Every source of comfort is tangled with the origins of his fear. Snape's intervention shifts from academic to intimate. Dumbledore wants Harry shielded from Dementors. The board wants the boy who lived functional. Narcissa quietly insists on additional protection. Snape is the compromise. In a dim classroom, a man who loved Lily Evans stands before her son in Slytherin green and teaches him the Patronus charm. The irony is surgical. Harry's wand hand shakes not only from the weight of expectation, but from the realization that this bitter, sarcastic professor has given him more unvarnished truth about Lily than anyone at the manor ever has. We deconstruct a timeline where the lesson is not just think of something happy, but decide which memories you are willing to build your identity on. Is it the rare softness of Narcissa reading to him by the fire? Is it the imagined father he has reconstructed from second-hand anecdotes? Is it the fierce, inexplicable loyalty he feels toward a house that would gladly follow Voldemort again? The turning point arrives late one night, not in a classroom, but in a corridor outside the staff room. Harry, returning from another failed attempt at a full Patronus, hears his own name, then Sirius's, then a phrase that detonates his equilibrium. He is the boy's godfather. For a moment, the world goes very still. Godfather. Not traitor in the abstract, not distant criminal, but legally and magically bound family. A claim that predates the Malfoy adoption, that even Dumbledore never mentioned. If Sirius Black is his godfather, then someone has stolen more than his childhood. They have edited his bloodline. Harry steps back into the shadows, heart pounding, as the adults' voices drop to a whisper. One thought cuts through the noise. If there is a third claim on him, neither Potter grave nor Malfoy crest, what happens to the fragile balance that has held his life together so far? He decides he has to find Sirius first, and the Dementors, waiting at the edge of the grounds, are suddenly not the only predators circling. The turning point arrives in a rotting wooden room that was never meant for children to rewrite history. The Shrieking shack is all splinters and dust, moonlight cutting in thin, surgical lines. Harry stands between Draco and Ron, Hermione just behind, wands shaking in a jagged triangle of distrust. Across from them, Sirius Black, gaunt, wild, everything Malfoy dinner conversations had promised, locks eyes with him. Beside him, Lupin's calm erodes in real time as the map, the rat, and the years of lies align. When Scabbers becomes Pettigrew, the air changes. Draco swears under his breath, the pure blood mask slipping as he recognizes the name, the mark, the implications. Ron looks sick. Hermione is already 3 steps ahead, assembling the legal and magical structure of what this means. Harry, though, is not assembling anything. He is watching the narrative Narcissa built for him. Lucius, the respectable ally, Sirius, the traitor, his parents betrayed by Gryffindor recklessness. Fracture in slow motion. Imagine the psychological fracture when Sirius explains Azkaban. 12 years. No trial. The man Harry has been trained to hate did not sell his parents. He was their choice for Godfather, their last line of loyalty. Meanwhile, Lucius Malfoy, who toasted the Dark Lord and then bought his way back into polite society, has been hosting Christmas. The subtext is brutal. Every bedtime story about dangerous blood traitors curdles. Every warning about Dumbledore's manipulation now has to coexist with the reality that the Ministry locked an innocent man away while Death Eaters walked free on technicalities and donations. Harry realizes he has been raised inside someone else's damage control narrative. Draco feels it too. He watches Harry's jaw clench, watches his friend, his rival, his almost brother, recalculate his own identity in real time, and something in Draco's own certainty buckles. If Sirius Black is innocent, then Lucius's war stories are not heroic survival, but self-preservation at any cost. The dynamic shifts. Draco is no longer the guide to how the world really works. He is another child who has been managed. Then comes Pettigrew's whimpering, begging, the offer to return to the Dark Lord. The room becomes a thesis on power and trauma. Sirius and Lupin move in for the kill, years of torment focusing into one lethal decision. Canonically, Dumbledore's ethics hover over this moment. Here, they do not. Harry's refusal is not about mercy as abstract virtue, it is about control. He has been the baby on the floor in Godric's Hollow, the weapon in prophecies, the ward of Malfoy Manor. Other people have decided who dies in his name: Voldemort, Dumbledore, Lucius. The core issue is mechanical. If Pettigrew dies here, the cycle continues. If he lives, Harry finally inserts himself into the causal chain. So he stops them. Not gently, not nobly, just absolutely. Pattern interrupt. This should be the moment of clean catharsis, the promise of a new home. In the original timeline, we deconstruct a timeline where Harry walks out of that shack, buoyed by the idea of living with Sirius. Here he walks back toward the castle, already calculating. Because he has a godfather now. And Narcissa has known that name for years. When he returns to Malfoy Manor, the marble floors feel colder. The house elves bow lower. Narcissa's eyes search his face, measuring how much of the truth he has finally stolen back. Harry realizes that every adult in his life has been editing reality, and that the next war will not simply be wands and curses. It will be over who gets to write his story at all. The marble cold of Malfoy Manor does not fade. It follows Harry to the Quidditch World Cup like a second skin. The top box is everything a boy raised in a cupboard was supposed to envy. Silk-lined seats, enchanted binoculars, ministerial handshakes, Lucius's cane resting against polished rail. But the real spectacle is not Victor Crumb diving. It is Harry watching his two worlds overlap in public daylight. From this vantage point, the stadium is a map of power. Ministry officials cluster like nervous birds. Foreign wizards in brilliant robes trade glances with old pure-blood families, and the Malfoys sit at the center as if they own the air itself. Harry feels the dynamic acutely. He is the boy who lived and the Slytherin prince, a living treaty between people who would happily hex each other in the dark. When the tents burn, that treaty dissolves. The riot is not abstract trauma on the Daily Prophet front page. It is screaming, smoke, and the sickening familiarity of certain gestures. One masked figure twirls his wand with the same idle elegance Lucius uses at dinner. Another tilts his head in the precise, bird-like way Harry has seen in the Manor's drawing room. Imagine the psychological fracture when the faceless threat you've trained against in defense class moves like your guardian. He does not see the dark mark as a relic the way Muggle-borns do, or as a triumphant banner the way some Slytherins secretly dream. Suspended over the trees, green and serpentine, it is a family crest he never agreed to wear. He feels physically ill. The subtext is brutal. This is what the Malfoy name once pledged itself to, and what the world assumes he will inherit. Back at Hogwarts, the Triwizard tournament is announced as a game, a diplomatic spectacle. The core issue is mechanical. 3 schools, 3 champions, clear rules, clear glory. But everyone in that hall knows Harry's life has never obeyed structure. When his name erupts from the goblet, it doesn't land like a prank. It lands like an overdue bill. We deconstruct a timeline where that blue-white flame is not a surprise, but a confirmation. Dumbledore's eyes sharpen with calculation, Moody's with suspicion, Snape's with something like disappointed inevitability. Lucius's letters arrive on expensive parchment, coldly advising advantage. Every faction that has been circling Harry's identity finally has an excuse to close in. House politics detonate instantly. Slytherin splits along old fault lines. Some swell with pride that their house has claimed the boy who lived. Others whisper that no one survives being that close to the Dark Lord twice. Hufflepuff mutters about fairness. Ravenclaw dissects the spellwork. Gryffindor resents that their traditional hero has been seated at the serpent table. Harry walks the corridors as a contested symbol rather than a person. The turning point arrives not in the arena but in a quiet alcove before the first task. Narcissa adjusts his robes with the same meticulous care she used on Draco's as a child, her hands briefly trembling. She does not tell him to win. She does not tell him to make the Malfoy name proud. Instead, she leans in, voice barely above a whisper. Whatever happens in that maze, remember, you owe nothing to any of them. It is framed as comfort. In reality, it is a warning and a permission slip for betrayal. The maze is not the beginning. The fracture starts with the dragon. In canon, Harry survives that first task through reckless courage and a broom. But this Harry has been raised in rooms where risk is calculated, not embraced. When he steps into the arena and faces the Hungarian Horntail, he is not thinking, "How do I fly?" He is indexing with terrifying precision every obscure countercurse Narcissa's tutors ever forced into his muscle memory. He does not summon a firebolt, he summons structure. A shimmering lattice of overlapping shield charms chained together with a serpentine movement of the wrist that would make Flitwick blink. The core issue is mechanical. Harry uses non-verbal sequencing, an Arctus-dampening hex to dull the dragon's heat, a blinding flare of Lumos Solaris aimed at the eye, then a low-crawling Confundus variant designed for skittish hippogriffs, not apex predators. It should not work. Reality yields anyway because his strategy is cruelly efficient. He never tries to overpower the beast, only to redirect its instincts. The crowd sees brilliance. Slytherin sees validation. Harry sees Narcissa's face in the stands, perfectly composed, and imagines the psychological fracture if he had chosen raw Gryffindor bravado and failed. The second task is worse. The lake is silent, the water black, and the hostage waiting below is not Ron Weasley or Hermione Granger. It is Draco. In some drafts of this timeline, it is Narcissa herself, pale hair floating like drowned silk. Either way, the message is identical. Your loyalty is not hypothetical, it is measurable. As gillyweed burns cold in his lungs, Harry moves past bobbing bodies and sees Draco chained, expression slack. The subtext is brutal. This is the boy who sneered that Harry was his brother, by convenience, not by blood, now reduced to leverage. What does Harry save, the symbol of his Malfoy life, or the strangers tethered to other champions? He knows the rules. He knows everyone is meant to survive. He also knows rules break around him. He cuts Draco free first. On the surface, Cedric reads the gesture correctly. Cedric has always seen past the Slytherin label, treating Harry not as rival or dark heir, but as a boy under impossible pressure. In quiet corridors, he asks the questions adults will not. Do you even want this champion's power? Victor Krum, all wary silence and Quidditch calloused hands, offers a nod that is almost respect after watching Harry's clinical dragon work. Fleur, who understands being turned into a symbol rather than a person, recognizes the tightness in his jaw as he glances toward the Malfoy box. Their dynamic is no longer simple competition. It is a study in how each of them carries expectation like armor or like chains. Then the turning point arrives, the maze. Each hedge-lined corridor becomes less an obstacle course and more a psychological map. One path hums with wards in Dumbledore's flavor of magic, promising guidance if he will accept the role of weapon. Another whispers in Parseltongue, a cold invitation to become Voldemort's perfected tool. A third feels like Malfoy Manor, rigid, elegant, suffocating. The heir apparent walking corridors already chosen for him. Harry keeps choosing the fourth option, over and over, the narrow, uncertain tracks that seem to belong to no one's design. We deconstruct a timeline where every jinxed mist and shifting wall is an argument about identity, and every refusal to turn back is a refusal to be owned. So when his hand closes around the cup beside Cedric's, the victory feels almost irrelevant. The pull behind his navel is wrong. It is not triumph, it is extraction. In that suspended second, as the maze dissolves into spinning darkness, Harry understands that this was never about winning a tournament. It was about delivering him to whoever has been waiting on the other end of that port key. And for the first time, he realizes he may have played directly into their hands. He lands in the graveyard not as a bewildered schoolboy, but as a Malfoy ward who instantly recognizes the architecture of a trap. Cold stone angels, leaning tombs, the smell of damp earth and old magic. This is not a battlefield. It is an altar. Cedric's body hits the ground with a dull, obscene finality. In that moment, the core issue is mechanical. Harry catalogues exits, wand angles, the distance to the cauldron, because that is how Narcissa trained him to survive polite drawing rooms filled with concealed wands and concealed agendas. But there is no etiquette for watching a friend die as an afterthought. The resurrection unfolds with a ritualistic precision that would impress any pure-blood matron. Bone, flesh, blood. The cauldron boils. The air thickens. When Voldemort rises, pale and slick as something dredged from the bottom of the lake, Harry does not see a myth. He sees the gravitational center of his household's fear made flesh. The dark mark burns in the distance, and the Death Eaters begin to apparate in, one crack at a time. Masks, robes, deference. Among them, Lucius. We deconstruct a timeline here. In canon, he is merely a servant called to witness his master's return. In this reality, he is also a guardian summoned to watch his ward be evaluated like an acquisition. Voldemort circles Harry with clinical curiosity. His gaze moves from the cut of Harry's robes to the controlled grip on his wand. "Lucius," he purrs, "you raised him well. The boy you failed to kill, polished in your own house." The subtext is brutal. Praise and accusation, braided together. Lucius bows lower, mask hiding the flicker of horror that his domestic life has become an exhibit. Voldemort is fascinated, and why wouldn't he be? A chosen one, fluent in pure-blood etiquette, trained on Malfoy Manor's dueling lawn, schooled in the rhetoric of blood purity even as he bears Lily's eyes. Imagine the psychological fracture in Harry. Every rule of posture and poise tells him to show deference. Every memory of his parents' murder, pieced together through whispers and overheard arguments, tells him to resist. The psychological warfare begins almost gently. Voldemort offers him a place at his side, the way a collector offers a place in a curated display. He promises Narcissa's safety, Draco's future, a restoration of Malfoy status untainted by Lucius's past failures. Dumbledore, he suggests, is the true manipulator, grooming Harry as a sacrificial symbol, while the Malfoys, ironically, have given him a real home. The logic is poisonous, but structurally elegant. Harry listens. He understands the power in the offer. He also understands the reality behind it because he has watched the dynamic of a family living under Voldemort's shadow. Narcissa's quiet insomnia, Draco's brittle arrogance, Lucius's escalating desperation to stay indispensable. This, more than prophecy, is what decides him. The turning point arrives not with a shout, but with a refusal, spoken in the same calm diction Narcissa drilled into him for ministry galas. He declines. Not as Gryffindor brave, but as someone who has conducted a psychological cost-benefit analysis of servitude and found it bankrupt. Serving Voldemort fractures families. He will not let the Malfoys become a case study in total collapse. The duel, the priori incantatum, the spectral figures, these play out with familiar choreography, but the emotional geometry has shifted. When Harry escapes and slams back onto Hogwarts grounds, Cedric's body in his arms, the pattern interrupt is immediate. The crowd does not merely see a dead champion. They see the Malfoy ward, immaculate robes torn and blooded, screaming for help. Silence fractures into panic. Students sob, teachers rush forward, the structure of the tournament disintegrates in real time. And on the edge of the crowd, Lucius watches, face schooled into aristocratic neutrality while his mind races. Voldemort is back. The boy who lived has returned as witness and rival, and the fault line of this new war runs directly through his own household, splitting loyalty, identity, and survival into mutually exclusive choices. Voldemort is back, but the boy who lived is not Dumbledore's quiet Gryffindor ally. He is a Slytherin heir, raised behind Malfoy wards. As the fifth year begins, the Ministry does not merely deny a Dark Lord's return, it weaponizes Harry's entire upbringing. In canon, Harry is the traumatized hero shouting into an indifferent press. Here, the narrative is neater for Fudge. A Slytherin Harry, godson to Narcissa, mentored by Snape, already rumored to know borderline magic. The smear campaign writes itself. The prophet runs careful phrases, impressionable youth among questionable influences, Potter's affinity with serpents, and lets the public connect the dots. The subtext is brutal. This is what happens when you let Slytherin near power. At Hogwarts, the isolation is surgical. Gryffindors distrust him as a Malfoy proxy. Slytherins, under pressure from their Death Eater parents, step away from the table he once anchored with Draco. Even Draco's loyalty fractures under the strain. He still sits beside Harry, but their conversations are whispered, clipped, full of unfinished sentences and swallowed names. Imagine the psychological fracture of realizing that every house banner in the Great Hall represents a constituency that now finds you inconvenient. Dumbledore's distance in this timeline is not just emotional negligence. It is calculated triage. He can feel Voldemort's presence brushing Harry's mind, sees the flashes of pain behind narrowed green eyes, and he knows legilimency is now a two-way corridor. But the core issue is mechanical. Any overt move to claim Harry as his protégé, private meetings, public defense, a seat by the high table, would trigger Malfoy retaliation and ministry hysteria simultaneously. So he chooses absence as a shield, hoping that by not pulling he won't snap the fragile dynamic between Order, Ministry, and Malfoy Manor. Narcissa reads this withdrawal with terrifying clarity. At the Manor, Firelight turns her face into sharp planes as she drills Harry in occlumency, her voice low, hands steady. Snape's official lessons at Hogwarts are brutal enough, but she does not trust a man still bound to Voldemort's inner circle. So quietly, she brings in a second tutor, a retired unspeakable with no public ties, meeting Harry in a warded drawing room during Hogsmeade weekends. If Voldemort ever walks through Harry's mind, every hidden act of her rebellion, every concealed letter to Dumbledore, every delayed summons answered late, will be laid bare. Umbridge arrives as the Ministry's pink-clad answer to this instability. In canon, she hates Harry for lying. Here, her mandate is broader: neutralize dangerous elements that threaten the house structure itself. A Slytherin-raised chosen one, half-whispered about in pureblood salons, is her nightmare scenario. She bans inter-house meetings that look too organized, targets any curriculum that might produce independent power, and singles Harry out as a living argument for stricter bloodline oversight. Her detentions are not just punishment, they are ideological correction. The turning point arrives in the Department of Mysteries, not with action, but with a vision. Harry wakes, heart hammering, seeing Sirius, reckless, beloved, still half stranger in this universe, writhing under Voldemort's curse. In canon, he runs almost blindly. Here, he hesitates. Is this another manipulation of his scar, another probe at the defenses Narcissa built, brick by brick? He paces, weighs Dumbledore's silence against Narcissa's desperate lessons, and still chooses to go. Because underneath the Malfoy polish and Slytherin discipline, his identity has never changed. He cannot leave family, however complicated, to die alone. And that decision, made in a corridor that smells of dust and fear, seals his next great loss. The turning point arrives in a dingy classroom, not a battlefield. Harry stands before a blackboard scrawled with Defense Association, then crosses it out and writes, in sharp green ink, Dumbledore's Army. The question mark stays. It matters. He is done pretending allegiance he does not feel. The core issue is mechanical. Hogwarts is a structure built on binaries, Gryffindor versus Slytherin, light versus dark, Dumbledore versus Voldemort, and Harry, raised in Malfoy marble and Slytherin politics, has learned to survive between categories. So, when he opens the DA not just to Gryffindors and Hufflepuffs, but to anyone who hates being used, the response is unexpected. A Ravenclaw girl with a dark arts-obsessed father. Two Slytherin half-bloods tired of being told they're not proper. Even a quiet 6th year from Draco's dorm who admits, in a voice like breaking glass, that he doesn't actually believe in the Dark Lord. Imagine the psychological fracture of Slytherins practicing shield charms beside Gryffindors, of Harry correcting a Malfoy cousin's wand grip while a Weasley watches. The subtext is brutal. These children have realized no adult is coming to save them. If they want power, they will have to build it themselves. That is the dynamic they carry into the Department of Mysteries. The trap still springs, visions of Sirius in agony, corridors that smell of dust and fear, but the team is different. Hermione brings a Ravenclaw tactician. Neville flanks with a Slytherin whose family attends the same solstice galas as the Malfoys. Draco is conspicuously absent, his last look at Harry in the common room unreadable. Yet as curses begin to fly among the spinning shelves of prophecy orbs, doors slam at opportune moments, and a disillusioned presence redirects a wandering Death Eater with a well-placed stunner. Draco's loyalty never announces itself, it just alters trajectories. The battle is uglier here because the training is better. Harry's DA has drilled on crossfire, on using architecture as armor. A Slytherin girl yanks a shelf down with Reducto to block a killing curse meant for Ginny. Neville, coached by those same pragmatists, uses a clumsy impediment jinx to send an attacker sprawling into his own hex. They are not polished duelists. They are children weaponizing fear. And still, Sirius dies. The archway is the same, the veil whispering with that uncanny underwater silence. Bellatrix's curse hits. Sirius falls, and for one suspended second, Harry sees not a reckless godfather, but the last uncomplicated claim to family that did not involve a serpent crest. Then, he is gone, and the fracture inside Harry finally reaches daylight. His scream is not just grief, it is accusation. At Dumbledore, who kept the prophecy hidden. At Lucius, whose masked presence among the Death Eaters is a living indictment. At Narcissa, who loved him fiercely but still raised him in a house built to serve the man who murdered his parents. Later, in the headmaster's office, the prophecy is no longer a mystery, but a sentence. He is the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. As we deconstruct a timeline, you can see the comprehension settle. Every adult has been arranging him on a chessboard. Dumbledore's weapon, Voldemort's obsession, Lucius's asset, Narcissa's redemption. No one, apparently, has made room for Harry Potter person. So when he returns to Malfoy Manor that summer, the echo of Sybil Trelawney's words is louder than the apparition crack. The manor's doors open. Narcissa waits in the marble foyer, eyes taking in the bruises, the hollowed stare, the new, brittle angle of his identity. She does not ask what Dumbledore said. She does not ask what the prophecy contained. She asks quietly, "What do you want?" Harry has no answer. Yet. Year 6 begins with a secret that does not belong to Harry, but will define him anyway. In a shuttered drawing room at Malfoy Manor, Draco stands before Voldemort and the Inner Circle. The Dark Lord does not simply assign a task. He engineers a psychological noose. Draco is ordered to kill Albus Dumbledore and to repair the Vanishing Cabinet, opening Hogwarts to Death Eaters. The boy is not just a weapon. He is collateral against Lucius and Narcissa, living leverage tied directly to Harry's household and surrogate brother. When Draco returns to the manor, the reality is clinical. His hands shake as he unbuttons his cuffs. His wand clatters against the marble. Narcissa knows enough of Voldemort's methods to understand the structure of the punishment. Failure will not fall on Draco alone. It will radiate through the family. Imagine the psychological fracture for Harry. The war is no longer abstract ideology, but a contract written on his brother's life. At Hogwarts, the deterioration is not dramatic at first. It is incremental, almost bureaucratic. Draco's robes hang looser. Shadows bloom under his eyes. He vanishes into unused classrooms, into the room of requirement, into silences that used to be filled with lazy drawl and petty gossip. Harry notices because Harry has always watched him. The dynamic is simply different now. The core issue is mechanical. Every new secret Draco keeps is one more barrier Harry must either respect as loyalty or break as resistance. Canon gives us a suspicious Harry tracking a rival. Here we deconstruct a timeline where his fixation is an act of care. He tails Draco in the corridors not to catch him, but to intercept him. He lingers outside the bathroom where Draco cries over a cracked sink, not with triumph, but with a sick, protective panic. How do you save someone who refuses to name the thing killing them? The Half-Blood Prince's potions book slides into this fracture like a blade. In class, Harry's sudden brilliance is not just academic. It is a revelation that power can be hacked. He follows the prince's annotations, sharper cuts, altered brewing order, non-verbal hexes in the margins, and feels the intoxicating efficiency of someone else's shortcuts. Magic stops being cleanly divided into light and dark. It becomes a toolkit, morally neutral until applied. The subtext is brutal. If he is willing to use unknown spells to win Felix Felicis, how far is he from using unknown spells to stop Draco? The turning point arrives in the bathroom duel. Harry, frantic, corners Draco, demanding the truth. Sectum Sempra erupts from his wand before his conscience catches up. Blood, tile, screaming. Draco on the floor, Harry kneeling in it. In that moment, he is not a hero confronting a villain. He is a boy who has just used an anonymous cruelty on his own brother equivalent. And then, the Astronomy Tower. This is our pattern interrupt. Harry is not frozen under an invisibility cloak, passively observing. He reaches the top in time to see Dumbledore, weakened, facing Draco. He also knows something Draco does not. Narcissa's clandestine meeting with Dumbledore the previous winter. The whispered pact to protect her son. the quiet acknowledgement that the headmaster is already dying. Snape arrives. Wands rise. Reality compresses into a single, impossible decision. Harry can strike, reveal himself, and try to save Dumbledore, shattering Narcissa's secret bargain and painting a target on her back. Or he can stay his hand and let the script play out. Dumbledore meets his eyes, just once. "Harry," he says very softly, "trust me." Snape casts the killing curse. Dumbledore falls. Harry does not fail to act because he is disarmed. He fails to act because for the first time, loyalty to the man who raised him is in direct conflict with the man he was destined to follow. When the green light fades, Harry is still standing. Wand lowered, realizing he has just chosen Narcissa Malfoy over Albus Dumbledore. And that choice will not stay secret for long. Malfoy Manor is supposed to be home, but as Deathly Hallows begins in this timeline, it has become something else. The polished marble heart of a regime Harry has finally admitted he is destined to destroy. The long dining table where he once revised potions with Draco now seats Voldemort's inner circle. The chandelier that used to glitter over birthday feasts hangs above strategy sessions where Muggle-borns are reduced to quotas and bloodlines to spreadsheets. Every corridor is a conduit for power, and beneath the parquet floors, the cellar has acquired a new permanent soundtrack. Muffled curses, the crack of curses landing, the thin, hoarse screams of prisoners who will never see daylight again. From the landing, Harry watches snatchers drag in a terrified Muggle-born, barely older than a Hogwarts fourth year, and the psychological fracture is immediate. This is the same banister he slid down as a child, racing Draco to breakfast. Now it overlooks an intake line for Voldemort's war machine. The subtext is brutal. His childhood sanctuary has been repurposed as an instrument of state terror. Narcissa moves through this structure with the precision of someone playing 3 games at once. In public, she is the compliant hostess, chair pulled back for the Dark Lord, voice perfectly modulated as she offers wine to men who brag about raids. In private, she becomes something else entirely. A comment overheard at dinner becomes a warning, smuggled to the Order through an enchanted hairpin. A list of targets, accidentally left near Harry's books, vanishes and reappears in a safe house via Kreacher's grudging loyalty. The core issue is mechanical. She cannot openly defy Voldemort, so she weaponizes etiquette, timing, and the Manor's own magic. But resistance has a cost. Bellatrix's eyes linger too long on Narcissa's hands when she passes a dish. Yaxley questions why certain raids always seem one step behind. Draco and Harry are increasingly summoned to prove their loyalty, paraded at meetings as the next generation of pure-blood power. Survival becomes a daily performance. The turning point arrives one evening when a captured former classmate is dragged into the drawing room. In this version, it is not a nameless prisoner. It is a Muggle-born Ravenclaw who once shared notes with Harry in charms, someone who defended him in corridors when Slytherin allegiances were questioned. Voldemort offers the room a lesson. Who will cast the first curse? Harry does not raise his wand. He watches as the Cruciatus is applied again and again by men he has eaten with, laughed with, called uncle in his childhood. And he understands with a cold, clean clarity that remaining here, behind Narcissa's careful shields, is no longer neutrality. It is complicity. The argument with Narcissa is quiet, but it hits with the weight of all 7 years. He tells her, voice raw, that love without freedom is just another form of control. That gilded cages are still cages. She answers that ideals mean nothing to the dead, that survival is the only currency Voldemort respects, and that walking out of the manor is walking into an execution. Imagine the psychological fracture. The narrative almost invites us to say, for a boy who has already chosen her once over Dumbledore. He could stay. He could keep pretending the walls are just walls, not accomplices. Instead, he writes a note to Draco. No explanations, only an apology and a promise that this is not a betrayal, but an attempt to make their shared name mean something else. Under cover of night, with a shrunken trunk in his pocket and the wards bending just enough under Narcissa's silent, unseen consent, Harry Potter steps past the manor gates. For the first time since Godric's Hollow, he walks into a world where no family name, Potter or Malfoy, will shield him from the consequences of his choices. Harry does not disappear into the wilderness with intent and good intentions. He vanishes into the blind spots of pure-blood society he was raised to navigate, turning the Horcrux hunt into a Slytherin field operation rather than a Gryffindor pilgrimage. The reimagined trio does not snap into place overnight. Hermione arrives first with research and righteous fury, expecting the frightened boy from under the stairs and finding instead a young man who can quote black family genealogies from memory and negotiate with goblins without flinching. Draco arrives last, dragged in by circumstance and a debt he cannot articulate, insisting this is temporary, that he is not defecting, that he is only here to make sure Potter does not destroy what is left of their world. In reality, all three of them are lying, mostly to themselves. On the road, the dynamic is volatile. Hermione is the structural brain of the operation, mapping out magical theory and curse-breaking strategy. But Harry is the one who knows which decayed manor once belonged to a gaunt cousin, which heirloom locket would have been whispered about over brandy in the drawing rooms of the Sacred 28. Draco, with the reluctant grace of someone raised for court politics, translates the social codes Harry weaponizes, turning old schoolyard arrogance into a functional cover identity. Here, the core issue is mechanical. Horcruxes are not just objects, they are embedded in networks of power, family, and trauma. A diary passed through a rich girl's cauldron. A cup resting in a vault whose key is bloodline and reputation. A ring sunk in a ruin that only old families remember by its gossip. Harry's pure-blood education gives him a map Dumbledore never possessed. Who owed Voldemort favors, who craved his favor, whose ancestral home would be considered an honor for a fragment of his soul. Slytherin traits cease to be moral defects and become survival tools. Harry's paranoia is not abstract anxiety. It is the reason they sleep under layered wards, rotate safe houses, and assume every owl is compromised. His ability to lie convincingly, learned at Lucius's table, refined under Snape's scrutiny, lets him walk into a Death Eater-friendly pub, order in the right drawl, and extract information about the Dark Lord's more esoteric insurance policies without raising a wand. Strategic thinking prevents canon disasters. No ministry break-in without redundant exit routes. No blind trust in a single narrative. No camping in the open because a legend told them to. But the subtext is brutal. Imagine the psychological fracture for Draco, listening to whispered accounts of massacres carried out by men who once drank champagne in his home, realizing that the elegant structure of his childhood was a veneer over industrialized terror. Hermione, meanwhile, has to renegotiate her entire schema of loyalty. Can she trust a boy who switches accents like masks, who can mimic his godfather's disdain to get past a warded door? Harry himself lives in constant triage, choosing daily which Malfoy reflexes to keep, calculated charm, defensive occlumency, and which to discard before they calcify into identity. The turning point arrives when a pattern in the data resolves. Old guest lists, half-remembered conversations, the peculiar way Narcissa flinched whenever the drawing room tapestry was mentioned. We deconstruct a timeline and see it. One Horcrux left unspoken because it was too close to home. Harry looks up from the parchments, voice flat, and names the conclusion he has been dreading. One of Voldemort's final Horcruxes is tied directly to Malfoy Manor. To destroy it, the boy who fled that house will have to walk back through its doors, and this time, every ward will recognize him. Malfoy Manor is no longer a home in Harry's memory. It is a crime scene he grew up inside. Now he approaches it as an intruder. The boy who once knew every ward by feel stands beneath a sky thick with dark magic, preparing to break into his own childhood. The infiltration is clinical. Hermione traces the lattice of protections with the precision of a curse breaker, Draco quietly correcting what the Order's diagrams get wrong. House elves have been retasked as sentries, Dementor-tainted air leaks from the upper floors, and unfamiliar Death Eaters patrol corridors where Harry once practiced pure-blood greetings. The core issue is mechanical. Every stone here remembers his magical signature, so they weaponize that history. Harry walks through the front boundary without resistance, dragging Hermione and Draco in his wake, using the manor's loyalty to the boy it helped raise. Inside, the reality is worse. Portraits that once cooed over his posture now hiss warnings. A boggart, left as a training tool for junior Death Eaters, spills from a cracked door, snapping into Dumbledore's corpse before Hermione slams it back with a wordless banishing charm. Draco leads them through servant passages Harry used to sneak sweets, past the ballroom where masked meetings bled into his bedtime. Imagine the psychological fracture, the architecture of his childhood repurposed into a war machine. Lucius is waiting in the drawing room, not with a duelist's poise, but with the brittle stillness of a man already sentenced. Voldemort's disdain has stripped him of ornament. His cane hangs unused at his side. When he sees Harry, something ugly and familiar ignites. He does not see the chosen one. He sees the experiment that ruined his family's standing. Lucius's wand is in his hand before the first accusation leaves his mouth. He blames Harry for the diary, for the ministry, for the manor's fall from grace. Every fracture in his identity routed through the boy he once tolerated at his table. He tries to reassert the old dynamic, barking orders at Draco, calling Narcissa from the shadows as if volume can restore hierarchy. But the subtext is brutal. Lucius has no power left that is not borrowed, and Voldemort is not in this room. When the turning point arrives, it is quiet. Narcissa steps between wands, not as a mediator, but as a defector. In her hand is a small, ornate box Harry recognizes from a forbidden cabinet. The hidden Horcrux, the secret she has carried like a second dark mark. In front of Lucius, in front of Draco, she presses it into Harry's palm and names what it is. That gesture is a public severing. There is no plausible deniability left. Harry's anger finally articulates. He tells her, voice shaking but controlled, that she gave him shelter, education, a version of family, everything except a choice. She counters with the truth she has never dared voice. She was terrified of what he might become if left entirely free, a weapon with no structure, no leash, shaped only by prophecy and trauma. They do not solve this. That is the pattern interrupt. Narcissa refuses to flee. She will stay to shield Draco, the house elves, even the cowed hangers-on who will be slaughtered for her betrayal. Harry walks out with Hermione, Draco, and the Horcrux, carrying the knowledge that he has a mother who lied, loved, and failed him in equal measure, a family he cannot fully claim and cannot entirely reject. And as the manor seals behind them, its wards shudder, as if choosing sides. The manor's wards shudder, and in that vibration, Harry feels a clean break. But the war does not pause for architecture choosing sides. It demands a sacrifice. The walk into the forest begins not at the edge of the trees, but in the echo of polished corridors and cold silver cutlery. Harry is not only walking to die for Hogwarts, for the abstract wizarding world Dumbledore loved to invoke. He is walking to die for the boy Narcissa tried to sculpt, the courteous, calculating heir who knew which fork to use, which slur not to say out loud, which mask to wear at every gala. And he is walking to die for the man who rejected that script. Each step over root and fallen branch is a rejection of Malfoy passivity. Lucius taught him by negative example that survival without integrity is just a slower death. Imagine the psychological fracture here. The child who learned that power meant never being at another's mercy, now choosing to place his throat in Voldemort's hand. The subtext is brutal. He is dismantling the very definition of safety that raised him. He knows why he must. The Horcrux inside him is not an abstract dark object. It is a familiar pattern. He has watched Voldemort hollow Lucius out year by year, trading humor for hysteria, pride for groveling. He has watched Draco's shoulders curve inward under the weight of a mark he never wanted. When Harry understands in Dumbledore's old office that a piece of that same parasitic will lives in his chest, the core issue is mechanical. Something in him is wired to answer to that voice. It has to die. So as the snitch opens, as the stone falls from his hand and the dead gather, he is not only accepting physical death, he is executing an internal coup. He is killing the part of himself that was trained to defer to Dark Lords and headmasters alike, the part that believed his identity must be negotiated through other people's agendas. And then, the clearing, the flash of green, impact. When Narcissa bends over his body, canon reasserts itself, but with the volume turned up. She has knelt beside him before, at 5 when he fell from a toy broom, at 11 when a training hex went wrong and Lucius sneered at his tears. This time, her hand on his chest finds a heartbeat that is barely there, a rhythm that should not exist. Reality buckles. Voldemort's curse has failed again, and the boy she raised has chosen to die anyway. She could expose him. She could demand he rise and duel, prove himself the weapon the Dark Lord expected from a Malfoy household. Instead, the turning point arrives in a whisper. Is Draco alive? In that question, we deconstruct a timeline of regret. She once denied Harry the chance to live on his own terms, wrapping him in etiquette and fear. Lying now is the only repair she has left. Her motivation splits cleanly. She must reach Draco, and she must give Harry what she withheld for years, an escape from every controlling hand, including hers. So she straightens, looks into the serpent's eyes, and commits the most intimate treason. He is dead. As Voldemort levitates Harry's body, parading it like a trophy, the structure of power appears intact. But Narcissa walks beside them, each step a quiet defection. She knows the truth marching toward Hogwarts is not the corpse in the Dark Lord's arms. It is the lie beating in her chest, waiting to detonate the moment the castle gates come into view. The lie detonates the moment the dead boy walks. Harry steps forward from the shattered entrance, ash in his hair. Narcissa's "he is dead" still echoing like a curse he refuses to honor. In the original timeline, this is a Gryffindor resurrection, the hero revealed to his house. But here, emerald and silver trim catches the torchlight. The boy who lived is wearing Slytherin colors, and reality buckles under the weight of that image. Imagine the psychological fracture in the Great Hall as students pour out. Gryffindors gasp, some sobbing, wands half raised in stunned hope. Across the aisle, a row of Slytherins simply freeze. For 6 years they have been told, explicitly and implicitly, that power flows from blood, from dark marks, from the Malfoy name. Now the Malfoy-raised boy stands alone between Voldemort and the castle, and his wand is pointed the wrong way. The core issue is mechanical. House identity at Hogwarts has always been treated like a sorting hat verdict, carved in stone. Bravery here, ambition there, never the twain shall meet. Harry's existence in this moment is a structural error in that system. When he speaks, calm, measured, pure blood diction, wrapped around open defiance, Slytherins are forced into a decision the castle has never asked of them. Not, are you evil, but whose future do you believe in? Some flee. It is not cowardice so much as triage. They were raised on contingency plans and exit strategies. Others, especially the younger ones who watched Harry shield first years from Carrow curses, stay. A 7th-year girl whose family funds half the ministry steps to his side. A half-blood boy who learned occlumency from Snape because Harry insisted joins the line. Cunning and ambition reorient, not toward domination, but toward survival with integrity. When the turning point arrives, the final duel, Harry is not improvising heroism. He is executing a strategy years in the making. Dumbledore taught him that Tom Riddle's greatest weakness was his inability to understand love. Narcissa taught him the ferocity of a mother who will burn the world for her child. Snape taught him how to weaponize perception, how to let the enemy see exactly what he wants them to. Lucius, ironically, taught him the geometry of power, how fear travels through institutions, and how to interrupt that current. So Harry does not just trade spells, he talks. He names Draco publicly as someone Voldemort discarded. He calls out the Lestrange's failures in front of their allies. Each sentence is a small sabotage of loyalty. The subtext is brutal. This man cannot protect you, and I already have. When the Elder Wand fails Voldemort, we deconstruct a timeline that never truly belonged to him. Yes, one law matters. Allegiance followed Harry from Malfoy Manor to this hall. But the deeper refusal is thematic. Power built on trauma and terror cannot command a wand that has just tasted the loyalty of students from every house raising shields in concert. The magic chooses the boy who makes others step forward, not back. Voldemort falls and the hall convulses into noise. But Harry does not stay for the Gryffindor celebration that never quite knows how to welcome a Slytherin champion. Pattern interrupt, he walks down. Past the dungeons, into cool stone and the quiet hiss of pipes, until the Slytherin common room opens in a wash of green light. He stands alone, reflected in black water and glass, Malfoy tailoring hanging off Potter bones, and asks the question no prophecy ever covered. Without a war, without an enemy, without this fractured identity defined against Voldemort, who is he actually allowed to become? The castle has no immediate answer. The war, however, demands one. In the months after Voldemort falls, the wizarding world does what it always does when reality becomes unbearable. It convenes a committee. Trials begin in a stone chamber that once hosted Wizengamot formality and now feels more like a collective confession booth. Death Eaters in shackles, names carved into public hatred, are processed with bureaucratic precision. But then the Malfoy file lands on the table and the structure wobbles. This is the family that hosted the Dark Lord, and the family whose matriarch lied to his face to save the boy who lived. The core issue is mechanical. How do you quantify loyalty when it has changed direction mid-war? How do you sentence a household in which the same drawing room saw unforgivable curses and secret acts of sabotage? Lucius's record is straightforward. Bribes, raids, the diary that opened the chamber. Narcissa's is not. She never bore the mark, never cast a killing curse, and yet her home was a headquarters of terror. The debates become vicious, less about law and more about the psychological fracture of a society that trusted these names for generations. When Harry takes the stand, the room recalibrates. He does not arrive in Malfoy black or Potter red, but in neutral ministry robes that look deliberately anonymous on Malfoy tailoring and Potter bones. He speaks carefully about the forest, about Narcissa kneeling over his supposedly dead body, about the quiet question, "Is Draco alive?" that outweighed her fear of Voldemort. He describes earlier smaller resistances, letters smuggled to the Order, house elves instructed to delay, the night she told him without saying the words that some loyalties were a prison. Then he turns, without flinching, to Lucius. The diary, the basilisk, the child sacrificed to ideology. He refuses the easy narrative. Narcissa, he argues, chose her son over her master. Lucius chose power over everyone. Imagine the psychological fracture, he suggests, of living in a house where those two equations warred in the same bed. The subtext is brutal. He is describing his parents by proxy, and the entire chamber knows it. Draco watches, pale and rigid, already living in a future he does not yet understand. Post-war, he does not flee abroad. He walks into a ministry office and, to general astonishment, asks where he can be useful. The answer, improbably, is a committee with Hermione Granger. Their mandate is to rebuild blood status law from the ground up. Protections for Muggle-borns, transparency in wand registration, a dismantling of old families-only hiring practices. Draco becomes the reluctant archivist of his own culture, sifting through pure blood traditions to separate the merely eccentric from the actively poisonous. It is tedious, humiliating, and, slowly, redemptive. Harry, meanwhile, rejects both obvious scripts. He does not move back to Godric's Hollow, haunted cottage turned shrine, nor does he retreat behind the iron gates of Malfoy Manor. Instead, he buys a narrow townhouse on the edge of Muggle London, close enough to ministry fireplaces and far enough from ancestral portraits. Official documents read Harry James Potter, because the Potter name is a public utility now, a symbol the new minister insists on. But in the quieter corridors of old pure-blood gatherings, he is still our Harry, the Malfoy experiment that did not quite go to plan. Invitations arrive from both directions. Old families want him at their tables as proof that the world has not changed too much. The new ministry wants him at press conferences as proof that it has. He attends selectively, dissecting each room with Slytherin-trained caution. He will endorse reforms that protect Muggle-borns, but he will not sign on to witch hunts against children of Death Eaters. He will share tea with Andromeda and Teddy, and then, on another evening, endure a brittle dinner at the manor, so Narcissa is not left alone with her ghosts. And then, one grey morning, he vanishes from every schedule. We deconstruct a timeline at a graveyard crossroads. First, Godric's Hollow, the Potter headstones, weathered and simple, names that were taken from him before he could speak them. He leaves white lilies, fingers lingering on the carved James and Lily as if testing whether they still belong to him. No speech, no dramatic vow, just the quiet acknowledgement of an origin story he never lived but still carries in his blood. From there, apparition cracks the air like a decision. The Malfoy family plot is colder marble, more elaborate, a monument to lineage as performance. Abraxas' unnamed great-aunts, the blank space reserved for Lucius, the the smaller, fiercely polished stone for Narcissa. She is not dead, but purebloods plan ahead. Harry stands before it anyway, because in every way that matters, a version of her died in that forest the night she chose him. He lays black roses here, the gesture as deliberate as the lilies. 2 sets of flowers, 2 histories, 2 incompatible expectations balanced in one pair of hands. Identity in this reality is not a binary, it is a negotiated treaty. He turns his back on both plots and walks away without looking back, footsteps fading into the ordinary rustle of wind through grass. The camera does not follow. It lingers instead on stone and petals, on Potter and Malfoy carved into different worlds, and on the empty space between them where a third name has yet to be written. The turning point arrives when someone, somewhere, decides what to carve there. We just don't know who it will be yet. So we leave the graves and the unwritten name and we deconstruct a timeline, strip away wands, houses and surnames, and a pattern emerges. Harry is recognizably Harry in both realities. In Privet Drive or Malfoy Manor, his first instinct is the same: interpose himself between power and the people it wants to break. Whether it's shielding a terrified first-year Muggle-born from a blood purity tirade, or refusing to let Draco take the fall for a cursed artifact, his reflex is protection, not conquest. He resists being a symbol, resists being a weapon, resists any narrative that demands he erase himself to earn love. Imagine the psychological fracture of a boy who has been told in 2 different languages that his value lies in service. The Dursleys frame it as obedience and invisibility. The Malfoys frame it as legacy and advantage. The vocabulary changes, the dynamic does not. In both timelines, the camera keeps finding him at the same angle. Jaw set, shoulders squared, saying no to adults who believe they understand destiny better than he does. Narcissa's love is the great variable. It is not abstract. It is a physical structure around his life. She takes him from Godric's hollow, shields him from Voldemort's more casual cruelties, smooths his hair before pureblood gatherings, and crucially, teaches him how to survive in rooms where one wrong word is a death sentence. Her protection saves him from the crude trauma of the cupboard. But there is a quieter imprisonment here. Every safety is also a leash. Every lesson in etiquette, a reminder that his continued existence is conditional. The subtext is brutal. She is both sanctuary and warden. Her redemption does not arrive when she lies to Voldemort about his body in the forest. That is still primarily about Draco. It arrives later when she stops trying to negotiate his soul, when she chooses to let him walk into danger without demanding that he walk as a Malfoy. The moment she stops editing his identity is the moment her love becomes clean. Around them, Slytherin bends but does not break. The core issue is mechanical. Remove blood supremacy from the house's operating system, and its defining traits, ambition, cunning, self-preservation, do not vanish. They reroute. Under a Slytherin-raised Harry, ambition becomes a drive to dismantle the old power structures from within. Cunning becomes strategic mercy, like orchestrating safe exits for half-blood classmates whose parents wear masks. Self-preservation becomes an insistence that surviving the war with one's conscience intact is a victory condition, not a luxury. Adult narratives crash against this new architecture. Dumbledore still wants a willing sacrifice. Voldemort still wants a symbol to corrupt. Lucius wants a tool to restore status. Narcissa, for a long time, wants a son who can be both hero and compliant heir. Harry's heroism is not that he fulfills any of these scripts perfectly, it's that he breaks all of them partially. He refuses Dumbledore's secrecy, Voldemort's ideology, Lucius's cowardice, Narcissa's control. This does not overwrite canon. It exposes its pressure points. The original story already asked whether house defines identity, whether upbringing is destiny, whether change is possible in the darkest rooms. A Slytherin Harry raised by Narcissa simply turns up the contrast. If the boy who lived can emerge from Malfoy Manor still choosing the vulnerable over the powerful, still choosing loyalty over fear, then the question lingering over that empty headstone space is not whose name will be carved. It's who will dare to change the story they were handed. And in the next movement of this timeline, we watch what happens when the houses themselves start answering. When we deconstruct a timeline like this, it's tempting to get lost in the spectacle of it. A baby lifted from the ruins of Godric's Hollow, not by Hagrid on a flying motorbike, but by Narcissa Malfoy in blood-spattered silk. A different cradle, a different lullaby, a different definition of the word mother. The core issue is mechanical. Change the hand that carries the child, and every later wand movement shifts. From there, the divergences cascade. Harry grows up in Malfoy Manor, fluent in pure-blood etiquette, tutored under portraits that sneer at his Muggle-born mother, yet cannot deny his power. The Sorting Hat, pressed against a mind schooled in Slytherin rhetoric, still hears the echo of Gryffindor courage, but this time it yields to the environment and sends the boy who lived to Slytherin. Draco is not just a rival, but a brother-shaped mirror. While friendships bend into unfamiliar configurations, perhaps a wary alliance with a sharper, more politically aware Hermione, or a Neville who sees in Slytherin Harry, proof that identity is not house-colored destiny. Meanwhile, the Malfoys become the axis around which Voldemort's war spins and cracks. Lucius tries to brand Harry as the Dark Lord's most valuable asset. Narcissa quietly, methodically, undermines that narrative, turning her home into both sanctuary and cage. Imagine the psychological fracture of a child who learns occlumency at the same table where he once learned his knife and fork technique. Through it all, the emotional through line is brutal in its simplicity. A boy suspended between two families, two wars, two incompatible visions of reality. He is the Potter's legacy and the Malfoy's experiment, a living argument between loyalty and survival instinct. The turning point arrives not in a battlefield, but in reflections. At the Mirror of Erised, he doesn't see one family restored. He sees a blended circle, James, Lily, Narcissa, even a chastened Draco, standing together. The subtext is brutal. His deepest desire is not victory, but integration. That desire reaches its sharpest articulation in two Slytherin spaces. First in the forest, when Narcissa lies to Voldemort about his death, choosing her son over her master and, by extension, choosing Harry's unresolved future over tidy martyrdom. Second, in the Slytherin common room, where this Harry finally confronts his identity, surrounded by green light and stone, deciding which parts of Malfoy, of Potter, of Voldemort's rhetoric and Dumbledore's faith he will keep, and which he will burn. So where does this leave the world that survives him? Imagine this Harry as a parent, explaining to his children that their grandmother once defied the Dark Lord with a single sentence. Imagine Hogwarts under a headmaster who slept for 7 years beneath the Black Lake in Slytherin's dormitories, rebuilding house structures so that ambition is not a synonym for cruelty. Which fates spiral furthest from canon, Snape, freed earlier from his double bind, or Draco, raised beside a brother who refused to kill for the right side of history? Here's where you come in. Tell me how you'd rewrite Year 3 with this Slytherin Harry colliding with Dementors, Sirius Black, and the truth about his parents. Tell me which house you'd land in under Narcissa's tutelage, with a childhood shaped by Malfoy discipline instead of Dursley neglect. And if you want more alternate history fractures, what if Snape were sorted into Gryffindor? What if Voldemort had targeted Neville instead? Subscribe, stay with this channel, and we'll keep asking the uncomfortable question. If the story could have gone differently, what does that say about the one we accepted as fate?